Dear guests, welcome to the Forum on Global Human Rights Governance. 首先有请原中央党校副校长、中国人权研究会第4届理事会副会长李君儒先生发言。First, I would like to invite Mr. Li Junru, former Vice President, Party School of the Central Committee of CPC, Vice President, the 4th Councils of China Society for Human Rights Studies, to give his speech. Let's welcome. 让我们掌声欢迎。
谢谢主持人。
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
当今世界在全球人权
The world
问
today
题上面
is confronted with multiple challenges
美国
on global
已经召集了
governance.
2次全球
The U.S. has convened 2 global democracy summits
分裂世界
proposing democracy against
2022年
authoritarianism in global governance.
习近平主席
In the afternoon of November 14,
巴厘岛同美国总统拜登会晤
2022,
的时候
when meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden in Bali, Indonesia, Chinese President Xi deeply proposed freedom, democracy, and human rights, all the common aspiration of mankind, which is also a consistent aspiration of the CPC. The U.S. has American democracy and China has Chinese democracy, both in line with their respective national conditions.
以中国国情和历史文
In
化
China, we have the whole process people's democracy
我们同样感到自豪
that it suits our national conditions, history, and culture, and
我在
reflects
各
the
地
will
考察
of
中国
people.
的全过程人民民主
In recent years, when
添加我的
I
考察体会
investigated about the whole process
一
people's democracy, I have the following observations. So, this major concept
在上海一个街道
of
社区
whole process
考察的时
people's
候第一
democracy
次提出的
was first proposed by General Secretary Xi in his visit in serving the Civic Center of Gubei Community in Shanghai in
具有
2019.
完整的
And this whole process people's democracy has
它既有
complete
全面广泛
system
有
process,
衔接的
participation practice,
又有多样畅通有序的
and
民主渠道
there is also the democratic channels.
又有民主协商
It has democratic election, democratic negotiation, decision-making, management,
它既有人
supervision,
民管理国家事务
and
的
it
活动
also has various channels and forms when people are managing national affairs, or the various channels and forms when people are managing economic and cultural affairs, managing social affairs.
它是过程民主
It
和
is
成
a
果民主
democracy where process democracy and
实际民主
outcome
和间接民主
democracy, procedural democracy, and substantive democracy, direct democracy, and indirect
正是这
democracy.
样的意义上，我们说
In such
这
a
是最广
sense,
泛
we call it
真实
as the
最
most
惯用的管用的民主。
universal,
二，
effective
全过
democracy
程人民民主这一中
The
国式民
second
主的形成和
is that the formation and proposal of this whole process people's democracy has
权利和政治权
cracked
利的
many
问题
hard issues of maintaining citizen and political rights in the world of democratic political practice.
毫无疑问应该是民
The demo
或者是全体人
should
民。
be people or all
全体
people.
人民怎么当家作主
However, the will of the people, all the people and interested people behind them are diverse.
票就是一人一票，通过投票
So usually there is this voting system, and those who got the majority of the votes will have the power to manage the country.
选举民主。
And then there is the
但是这样的
election system or the election democracy, but then a new problem rises. That is, when the majority represents people, how about the minority?
和意志怎么能够得到保障？
And how can we safeguard the interests of minority?
经过票
And
的
the second is that how the representative elected by the voting system represent his voters, even all the
如
people,
果防范
so as to avoid
完全
democracy
违背，
losing shape or going bad.
也是需要
And there's also political corruption, such as
怎
prevention and
么解决
also
民主难题的呢？
prevention of bribery. Then how China solves such kind of democratic hard issues?
通过
Firstly, in the
更
design,
正确的制度设计，
we have this
破解了
design of National People's Congress (NPC) plus CPPCC, Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, The election of the people's deputies implements the secret ballot and the minority is subordinate to the majority voting system principle, where some excellent, talented people of governance may fail to be chosen. So while giving full play to the NPC, we also capitalize on the role of the CPPCC. There is this political consultation, democratic supervision, and participation in the liberation and administration of state affairs. And there's also the innovation in our practice. For example, we ensure the high representation of the deputies. We innovated the system. At the community level, we have established the NPC station, and also in some companies, there's also the liaison points for the NPC, and there's official website and channels for NPC deputies. And through the WeChat account and other social platforms, we can allow people to have access to the NPC deputies. Number 3, the biggest highlight of the whole process of people's democracy is to realize people's rights to be masters of the country. China's democracy is for the democracy for more than 1.4 billion people, to guarantee all these people's rights and the rights of human rights, which is included. We are happy to see that China has got the secret formula. What is this secret formula? It means that matters affecting the interests of the people of all ethnic groups in China are discussed extensively among all people, and matters affecting the interests of the public of a particular locality shall be discussed extensively among the people of that locality. And President Xi pointed out that under the Chinese socialist system, consultation should be the prevailing way, and we need to identify the biggest denominator, and that is the truth about democracy of people. In the history of democracy around the world, this extensive participation and consultation by the people is called as the essence of the people's democracy. Then how can people participate on a broad basis in the economic social affairs? First, we need to establish contact points for community-level legislation and improve democratic legislation. And during his visit in Shanghai, President Xi mentioned about the establishment of the first batch of contact points in Hongqiao. It solicited opinions regarding 67 regulations, and also 100 opinions were adopted out of 300 opinions for the establishment of the contact points. For example, in Zhejiang, there is the NPC deputy contact point. So regarding the budget consultation, more than 20 opinions were raised. And also there is the better management of the budget. And also, the third is to improve the mechanism for attracting public opinions to serve reform and opening up.
For instance, Yiwu in Zhejiang province has a world-famous small commodity market. The Standing Committee of Yiwu Municipal People's Congress, as the contact point for grassroots legislation of the Legislative Affairs Commission of the NPC Standing Committee, has set up 47 consultation units and 15 liaison stations in the city. The fourth is to improve social governance mechanism and improve people's livelihood. So, just 2 or 3 minutes walk away, you can see a place where there's a small hall. Actually, President Xi Jinping had a consultation with the local community at that hall. So this people making the decision is something really make the residents proud. The last topic I'd like to touch upon is the global governance. We are not in favor of countries that do not meet one's appetite should be sent to non-democratic countries for one's own selfish interest. So we're in favor of democratic practice in treating every nation in a democratic way, and we respect every country's freedom and independence in protecting and promoting their own human rights and building their own human rights model. That's all. Thank you.
感谢李君如先生的精彩发言。现在有请喀麦隆人权委员会主席詹姆斯·穆安格·科比拉先生发言。Thank you, Mr. Lee. Now let's welcome Mr. Gabriel James Muang B. Kobila, Chairperson, Cameroon Human Rights Commission. Let's welcome.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs,
distinguished leaders, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Actually, I'm speaking here as the chairperson of the Cameroon Human Rights Commission, but I also noticed that there are many scholars, experts, and researchers here in the audience. So I would like to emphasize that I have also the title of a scholar in Hague International Law. Actually, a few days after the celebration of the centenary of the Hague Academy of International Law from 24th to 26th May this year on the theme of challenges of international law, with an opening roundtable devoted to the public interest in international law, I find it quite interesting to focus on the general interest and the governance of human rights. The field of human rights is one of the least consensual areas of global governance. However, the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights provides a solid foundation for cooperation in the field of human rights. As provided in its Article 2, Paragraph 1, each of the states parties to this covenant undertakes to act both by its own effort and by international assistance and cooperation with a view to ensuring progressively the full exercise of the recognized rights. On March 26, 2010, the Human Rights Council adopted without vote an initiative Egypt. Also, there are human rights for children. Actually, international confidence and conventions are devoted to promoting international cooperation in improving the livelihood for children. Actually, as the High Commissioner of the United Nations of Human Rights, there is an annual report about increasing international cooperation in human rights. In June this year to July this year, there will be a report submitted. But here, I'm not here to emphasize the definition of human rights. Because it is obvious that if the rights of humans are universal, the definition of this term is not. What is considered a human right in Africa and in part of Asia, I'm thinking of polygamy, is rejected elsewhere. What is pantheonized as human rights in Europe or more widely in the West is just as vigorously rejected elsewhere. We therefore stick to the universally recognized human rights, which constitute the commune in this matter. But even with these, the criteria for assessing compliance can vary substantially across contexts. So it is highly necessary for us to integrate human rights issues with other issues together, or maybe through multiple lenses. Otherwise, the question is, should we wait for those who have advocated the all-out liberalization of investment, the contemporary equivalent of the priority given to civil rights, to feel the negative effect of certain exaggeration of these rights and take, for example, the option of privileging the right to development or economic, social, and cultural rights in order to rebalance international cooperation in the field of human rights? I do not claim to be able to answer all these questions in detail. Can cooperation lead to better human rights governance? Under what conditions? For what results? How does cooperation pervert the governance of human rights? Does international human rights cooperation ultimately require global governance based on a directive public order? I think we find outlines of answers by examining successfully the four major trends in the current governance of human rights, including with the United Nations Organization, the prioritization of rights, and the correlative concealment of duties. First, the failure to take into account the right to peace, which should result in the active prevention of wars. Second, the biases which affect transnational cooperation in matters of human rights. In this case, the relations between non-state actors and states in this field. And actually, we too often tend to forget this segment of the preamble to our Constitution, which nevertheless recalls Article 27 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which reads as follows: rights and freedom of each person are exercised with respect for the rights of others, collective security, morality, and the common interest. And actually, the Cameroonian people, through the preamble to the Constitution of January 1996, affirms its attachment to the fundamental freedoms enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Charter of the United Nations, the African Charter of Human Rights. Men and peoples are all the international conventions relating thereto and duly ratified. The Constitution of Cameroon, the internal text taken within the framework of implementation of the regional and international legal instruments ratified by the state of Cameroon, thus guarantee to any person under its jurisdiction the free exercise of rights. Actually, we know that we ignore the warning of Gustave Le Bon, a French doctor, anthropologist, social psychologist, and a sociologist, a specialist, actually, among other things, in behavioral disorder and the psychology of crowds, who observed that the surest means of destroying the principle of authority is to speak to each one of his rights and never of his duties. In the context of non-upmanship, where certain human rights are presented as absolute dogmas and where freedoms border on anarchism in and outside social networks. Here I'd like to quote a Latin adage, largely misunderstood, and I translate: where there's a right, there too is an obligation. As for the articles of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, these are Article 27 and 29. Here I read: every individual shall have duties towards its family and society, the state, and other legally recognized communities and the international community. The rights and freedom of each individual shall be exercised with due regard to the rights of others, collective security, morality, and the common interests. And also, in Article 29, there are specifically mentioned that to preserve harmonious development of the family and to work for the cohesion and respect of the family, and also As for the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, its Article first, entitled Responsibility of Each Children is quite eloquent. And also there are many other details and specifics in other important human rights covenants and treaties. At the African continent in 1981, we adopted African.
Ainsi, l'article 23 alinéa 1er de la Charte africaine énonce que les peuples ont droit à la paix et à la sécurité tant sur le plan national que sur le plan international.
The African Charter on Human and People's Rights, adopted in 1981 and entered into force in 1986, refers to the right to peace in a collective perspective. Thus, Article 23, paragraph 1, states that people have the right to peace and security both nationally and internationally. This consecration of the rights to peace calls for the adoption of measures both nationally and internationally. Africa enjoys beautiful landscape and natural resources. There are our own conflict resolution mechanisms. So we sincerely welcome people to come and join us for a more beautiful life. In 2001, the United Nations Human Rights Conference adopted a resolution about people's rights, and former UN Secretary General Gali, in 1992, his famous Agenda for Peace, which was based on international solidarity in these areas. Unfortunately, this agenda was not received. It didn't receive a favorable response from certain major powers, members of the United Nations Security Council, and the African continent countries. And there are many differences in history, culture, and others. Against this background, the wars are taking a heavy toll on various parties involved in the wars. So there are also bias against international cooperation in human rights. Now let us look at both the situation in NGOs and in civil societies. First, NGOs. We know that NGOs, which are in fact national associations operating in several countries where those members come from several countries, are not very different from national civil society organizations. Hubert Vadrina, the former French Minister for Foreign Affairs, who certainly shouldn't be asked too much, classifies some 30,000 NGOs that exist throughout the world into several categories. In his book, entitled Les quartiers de la France à l'heure de la globalisation, one encounters there, he writes, the best and the rest. Generosity, dedication, networks, militancy, interest, lobbies, beliefs, and many real disguised powers, so that without discernment in this landscape, we will very often take ladders for lanterns, especially since the hierarchies of powers. Actually, therefore, he explains civil societies and NGOs from rich countries ultra mediatized with the means to communicate, and therefore the power to impose their reading of an event, which will exert the maximum influence in the world. The African, not just that of Niger, Bolivia, and Bangladesh. It's not Nigerian NGOs that will intervene in Northern Ireland or demonstrate in Seattle. Be that as it may, NGOs are often the vectors of specific biases that distort understanding and sometimes sabotage the noble cause of human rights everywhere in the world. The absurd idea that the state would be the sole holder of human rights obligations, since it is the only one who signs the treaties, which means that the designated footprint, and the sole responsible for the non-respect of human rights in a country is the state. Second, the erroneous idea that the pronouncements of written and universal non-judicial human rights mechanisms are nevertheless obligatory, since these mechanisms have been created by obligatory treaties or certain speculations of the treaties applied states to apply the treaties in force. The erroneous idea that norms relating to human rights are absolute dogmas which apply uniformly in all countries and admit of no derogation or exemption, or that the state must apply them under penalty of being treated as a rogue state. The fourth failure is to respect proportionality. The bias of the search for funding, which leads them either to exaggerate reality to hope for the desired funding or to maintain the language and work on the priority themes of the donors. The bias of the search for visas for their members or for their relatives or for third parties against remuneration by presenting them as people persecuted by the regime. So this is the case of CSOs. And also the political bias that leads some CSOs to betray the integrity of human rights defender by adhering to the political party platform or by making political demands such as support for insurrectionary marches and call for overthrow the regime to set up a transitional government. And here, as I said before, there are multiple risks or for this group of people out of their interior motives.
And this will betray the trust of the human rights defenders, and the political bias leads some CSOs to betray the integrity of the human rights defender by adhering to political party platforms or by making political demands. My recommendations: this is indisputable that human rights are one of the founding principles of modern societies. I have 4 recommendations. Number 1, the generalization of the approach based on human rights. The second is the importance of human rights education. As UNESCO former DG, Mr. Meyer, said that it is in the minds of people that the war is born, and it is also in the mind of the people that we must cultivate values of peace. Let us be the craftsman. And the third is the founding mechanism for human rights, for economic, social, and cultural rights. The fourth is the interactive framework to encourage the sharing of experience and good practices between NHRI and South countries.
感谢科比拉先生的精彩发言。接下来有请蒙古前总理恩赫塞汗门德塞汗先生发言。Thank you for inspirational speech, Mr. Gobila. Next, let's invite Mr. Angsaikan Mentsaikan, advisor, Mongolian Democratic Party, former Prime Minister of Mongolia. Let's welcome.
Эрхэм хурлын дарга, эрхэм цач төлөөлөгчлөө, эрхэм ноён татагтанараа, юуны өмнө дэлхийн хүний эрхийн засаглалын форумд урьж оролцуулсан Шинхua мэдээллийн агентлаг болон хүний эрх судлалын хятадын нийгэмлэг талархал илэрхийлж байна. Хурлыг хамтран зохион байгуулж хятадын төрийн зөвлөлийн мэдээллийн алба гадаад харилцааны яам, хятадын олон улсын хөгжлийн хамтын ажиллагааны агентлаг мөн талархал сайн сайхан бүхний үсээ өрөөж байна. Хүмүүн төрлөختөн энх хамгаалан, хөгжил дэвшил, хамтын ажиллагаа, хүний эрхийг урд өмнөхөөс илүү их хүсэмжилсэн цаг үед хүний эрхийн засаглалын асуудлаар форум зохион байгуулж байгаа нь чухал ач холбогдолтой арга хэмжээ юм а. Хүний эрхийн засаглалын асуудлаар орон бүр өөрсдийн туршлагаа хуваалцах нь цаг үеийн шаардлага билээ. Энэ асуудал нь асар том сэдэв, олон хэмжигдэхүүнтэй асуудал билээ. Та бүгдийн санал бодол хилцүүлэг хүний эрхийн засаглалыг боловсронгуй болгоход том хувь нэмэр болно гэж бодож байна. Уг форумд олон намын тогтолцоотой Монгол улсаа тэр дотроо арчилсан намыг төлөөлөн оролцож байгаагийн хувьд Монгол улсад улс төрийн шийдвэр гаргах төвшөнд эмэгтэйчүүдийн оролцоог хазаарлагч хүчин зүйлсийн талаар манай судлаачдын хийсэн судалгааны талаар үг хэлэх нь та бүдгийн анхааралд хүрэх болов уу гэж бодож байна. Улс төрт эмэгтэйчүүдийн бүрэн дүүрэн эрх тэгш оролцоог хангах нь зөвхөн хүний эрхийн асуудал төдийгүй өргөн утгаараа доктортой хөгжил, арчлын үндэс суурь болдог. Эмэгтэйчүүдийн оролцоотой батсан альва шийдвэр нь нийгэм тэгш байдлыг бий болгоход чухал үүрэгтэй. Харамсалтай нь улс орны түүх соёлын онцлог, нийгмийн засгийн хөгжил, эрэгтэй эмэгтэй хүмүүсийн зам байдлын ялгаа зэрэг олон хүчин зүйлийн нөлөөгөөр нийгмийн амьдралын олон салбарт тэр дундаа улс төрийн тавцанд гендерийн тэгш байдал хангахдаггүй байгаа нь статистик баримтаас харагддаг юм аа. Энэ байдал нь тэгш хүртээмжтэй хөгжилд хүрэх гол саад бэрхшээлийн нэг болж байгаа тул Нэгдсэн үндэсний байгууллагын доктортой хөгжлийн зорилтууд 2030-д гендерийн тэгш байдлыг хангах, эмэгтэйчүүд октийн эрх мэдлжүүлэх чиглэсэн зорилтыг тусгасан билээ. Нөгөө төвөр 2020 онд эмэгтэйчүүдийг мэдлжүүлэх, гендерийн тэгш байдлыг дэмжих зорилготой Бээжингийн тунхаглал үйл ажиллагааны хөтөлбөр баталсан байсан. Энэхүү түүхэн үед зөвхөн архиц твчлэн үнэлээ зогсохгүй тулгамдаад байгаа асуудал саад бэрхшээлийг арилгахад урд урдынхаас илүү хүчин чармаал тавих хэрэгтэй болоод байна. Дэлхийн улс орнуудын үндэсний парламентууд эмэгтэйчүүдийн дэлхийн дундаж хувь 1995 онд 11.3 байсан бол өдгөө 24.4% болоод байна. Гэвч бүхэлдээ өөрчлөлт бол удаан байна. Дэлхийн эдийн засгийн форумын тооцоогоор өөрчлөлт энэ хурдаар явах юм бол улс төрч гендерийн ялгаа энэ зуунд арилахгүй юм аа. Сүүлийн 20 гаруй жилийн хугацаанд манай дэлхийд даяар парламент эмэгтэйчүүдийн төлөөллийг нэмэгдүүлэхэд зоригтой дэвшил харагдсангүй. Нэгдсэн үндэсний байгууллагын тайлангаас үзэхэд 2019 оны байдлаар дэлхийн бүх улс үндэстний парламентын ердөө 24.3%-ийг эмэгтэйчүүд бүрдүүлж байна. 2020 оны байдлаар төрийн тэргүүн сонгогдсон хүмүүсийн 6.6% нь эмэгтэй, засгийн газрын тэргүүнээ сонгогдох хүмүүсийн 6.2% нь эмэгтэй байгаа юм аа. Дэлхийн хэмжээнд зарим нэг нааштай дэвшил харагдаж байгаа ч Дэлхийн эдийн засгийн форумын 153 орныг хамруулсан гендерийн зөрүүтэй байдлын 20 оны тайланд дурдсанаар дэлхийд даяар гендерийн тэгш бус байдлыг арилгахад дахиад 99.5 жил шаардлагатай байна. Энэ бол гендерийн тэгш байдал тогтоох тэмцэл шуурхахад өдөө байгааг харуулж байгаа хэрэг билээ. Монгол улс эмэгтэй эрхтэй хүн тэгш хандах үзэл санааг 2024 1960-1992 онд батсан 4 удаагийн үндсэн хуульдаа тусгаж мөн олон улсын гэрээ конвенцүүдэд нэгдэн орсон. 2012 оны сонгуулийн үр дүнгээр улсын их хурлын нийт гишүүдийн 14.5% нь эмэгтэйчүүд байсан бол 2020 оны сонгуулийн үр дүнгээр улсын их хурлын нийт гишүүдийн 17.6% төрсөн. Энэ манай улсын хувьд түүхэн үзүүлэлт хэдий ч дэлхийн дундаж Азийн дунджаас доогуур хэвээр байна. Үндэсний статистикийн хорооны мэдээлэлээр манай улсын нийт хүн амын 49.15% нь эрэгтэй, 50.85% нь эмэгтэй байгаа. Дэлхийн эдийн засгийн форумаас жилд бүр гаргадаг дэлхийн гендерийн зөрүүтэй байдлын индексээр Монгол улс уурсан үзүүлэлттэй байгаамаа. Шалтгаан нь эмэгтэйчүүдийн улс төрийн эрх мэдэл оролцооны түвшин хангалтгүй байгаа нь нөлөөлжээ. Монгол улсын сонгуулийн тухай хууль нам эвслээс нэр дэвшүүлэх тооны дээд хязгаар 20% байх залтыг оруулсан. 2020 онд сонгуулийн тухай хуулийг баталсан боловч эмэгтэйчүүдийн оролцооны доод түвшнийг 30% хүргэх санал гарсан. 2024 онд эх жил Монголд парламентын сонгуул болно. Шинэ сонгуулийн хуулиар нийт эрхчлэлийн 30-аас доошгүй хувийн эмэгтэйчүүд байхыг хуулийн төсөөлийн өдрүүдэд яригдж байгаа. Олон улсын практикаас харахад эмэгтэйчүүдэд улс төрийн эрх мэдлүүхий албан тушаалуудыг нээж өгөх нь илүү үр дүнтэй, сайн хэрэгж хөгжлийн бодлогыг тодорхойлох боломжийг бий болгодог хэмээн үздэг юм а. Эмэгтэйчүүдийн улс төрийн оролцоог нэмэгдүүлснээр нийгмийн халамж сайжирдаг эерэг талтай. Үүний зэрэгцээ засгийн газрын эмэгтэйчүүд тоо өндөр байснаар боловсрол, хүүхдийн хоол, тэжээлийн асуудал дэвшил гаргаж эмэгтэйчүүдийн entrepreneurship ихээхэн хөрөнгө оруулалт хийдэг. Боловсрол, хоол, тэжээлийн асуудал сайжирч эмэгтэйчүүдийн эрхэлдэг жижиг бизнесүүдийг дэмжих нь хөгжиж буй орнуудад ядуурл тэмцэх хамгийн нийтлэг үр дүнтэй арга зам юм а. Улс төрд эмэгтэйчүүдийн төлөөлөл нэмэгдэх тохиолдолд дээр дурдсан дэвшил гардаг болохын судалгаанаас харагдаж байна. Улс төрийн шийдвэр гарах төвшөнд эмэгтэйчүүдийн оролцоог хязгаарлаж байгаа хүчин зүйлсийн хүрээнд Монгол улсад хийгдсэн судалгааг авч үзсэн болно. Дээрх судалгаанаас үзэхэд улс төрийн шийдвэр гарах төвшөнд эмэгтэйчүүдийн оролцоо хангахгүй байгаа гол шалтгаан нь нэгдүгээрт эрэгтэйчүүд дамгуулсан улс төрийн бүтэц 35%, хоёрдугаарт эмэгтэйчүүдийн сонгогч бага дэмждэг 13%, гэр бүл хэмжээний ажил үүрэг 12% зэрэг болж байна. Асуудлыг гүнзгийрэн судлах үүднээс фокус групп ажиллуулжээ. Судалгааны явцад дараах үр дүн гарсан байна. 1. Гэр бүлийн үүрэг хариуцлагаас үүдсэн давхар ачаа нь эмэгтэйчүүдийн улс төрийн оролцоог хязгаарлаж байна. 2. Гендерийн хэвшмэл ойлголт эмэгтэйчүүдийн улс төрийн оролцоог хязгаарлаж буй үндсэн суурь шалтгаан хэмээн гендерийн экспертүүд дүгнэж байна. 3. Гендерийн хэвшилж шаардлагаас үүдэн эмэгтэйчүүд хүлээн зөвшөөрөх шаардлага үүсдэг нь улс төрийн оролцоонд хязгаарлалт болдог байна. 4. Төгс эмэгтэй өөсөвгүй улс төрч байхыг эмэгтэйчүүдээс шаарддаг байна. Эрэгтэй улс төрчөөс илүү өндөр шаардлага эмэгтэйчүүд тавигддаг гэдгийг эмэгтэй улс төрчид гендерийн экспертүүд аль аль нь зөвшөөрсөн. Өөрөөр хэлбэл нийгмийн зүгээс эмэгтэй эрэгтэй улс төрчтэй хувьд ялгаатай стандартыг тавьдаг гэсэн үг юм а. Дээрх судалгаанаас харахад эмэгтэйчүүдийн нийгэмд гүйцэтгэх үүргийн оройлын талаар хэвшмэл байдлыг өөрчлөх, цаашлаад арилгахад боловсрол чухал үүрэгтэй болох нь харагдаж байна. Цааш бол олон улсын сайн туршлагыг судлах чухал ач холбогдолтой. Тухайлбал намын эмэгтэй гишүүдийн квот нэмэгдүүлэх санаачлагыг анх Швед улс гаргаж байжээ. Гэвч квот нь мерит зарчимтай зөрчилж байна хэмээн
The following results were achieved during the study. These include the double burden of family responsibilities, limits women's political participation. Gender experts conclude that gender stereotypes are the fundamental reason that limit women's political participation. Due to gender stereotypes, women's need for recognition is a limitation to political participation.
Монгол сонгуулийн шинэ хуультай хэлцэх явдлыг цахилгаан товч асуудал хөндөгдөж байгаа. Эцсийн шийдвэр гараагүй ч дээрх чиглэлээр арга хэмжээ авах сонирхол улс төрийн намуудад бий болж байна. Нөгөө дээгүүр эмэгтэйчүүд улс төрчийн хувьд сонгуулийн кампанит ажилдаа зориулсан мөнгө хөрөнгө босгох нь эрэгтэйчүүдийн бодвол илүү төвхтэй байдаг нь судалгаанаас харагдсан. Төрөөс улс төрийн намуудыг санхүүжүүлдэг байхын энэ асуудлыг шийдвэрлэх гол шийдэл болохыг судалгаанд дурдсан орнуудын жишээ харуулж байгаамаа. Эдгээр орнуудын хувьд улс төрийн намуудад төрөөс олох санхүүжилтийг гендерийн тэгш байдлыг хангахад оруулж буй хувь нэмэртэй уялдуулж өгсөн туршлагыг судлах шаардлагатай юм а. Энэ мэтчлэн Монголд оролдлогууд бол хийсээр байгаа. Улс төрийн шийдвэр гаргах төвшөнд эмэгтэйчүүдийн оролцоог нэмэгдүүлэх олон орнуудын шилдэг туршлагыг судалж үр дүнтэй хэрэгжүүлэх нь хүний эрхийн дэлхийн засаглалыг төгөлдрөх нэгэн чухал алхам болох юм а. Анхаарлаа тавьж баярлалаа.
感谢门德塞汉先生的精彩发言。现在有请巴拿马外交部秘书长琼斯·库珀先生发言。Thank you, Mr. Mantzaikan. Let's welcome Mr. Jones Cooper, General Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Panama. Let's welcome.
Muy buenos días a todos y todas, distinguidas personalidades.
Good morning, dear guests,
Embajadores, invitados especiales.
ministers, ambassadors,
También
guests.
un saludo muy especial a nuestros anfitriones,
Good morning.
organizadores de este magno evento.
I want to especially thank
El equipo
the organizers of the forum
en todas estas actividades.
and all our
Presentación el día de
working
hoy
staff for your dedication and efforts to this conference.
y la
So today
vulnerabilidad
I want to
social,
talk about human rights
tema
issues
pendiente en el contexto
and also
global y
the
latinoamericano.
vulnerability and linkage between
En el contexto
human rights and the
internacional para
vulnerabilities
proteger
of
la
the
seguridad
society.
e integridad de los seres humanos marcaron un hito en nuestra historia.
We need
Basta
to
recordar que en
ensure
esta ruta de lucha
humanity's
social
security,
han transcurrido ya
and to ensure the
75 años
security
desde que en
is a key milestone of
1948
human
fue
history.
adoptada por la Asamblea General de las Naciones
We
Unidas
all remember that in 1948,
encontrando su origen en la
it was
Declaración de
adopted
los
by
Derechos
the
del Hombre
General Assembly of the United Nations in Paris on December 10th in the plenary session number 83. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, finding its origin in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen,
Charles Marie,
emphasizing that in 1947, Eleanor Roosevelt, Panong Chong,
doble tarea de redactar la Carta
among a
Internacional
group
de
of
Derechos
18
Humanos,
members of outstanding trajectory, were given the task of drafting the International Bill of Human Rights at the end of World War II and with the creation of the United Nations Organization. Adopting the human rights initially, there are 26 countries where the USA, the United Kingdom, the Union of Soviet Republics, China, Australia, and etc. Along these lines, we can affirm that since the second half of the 20th century, the consensus has been strengthened around the particular importance of the recognition of human rights.
Su formulación, reconocimiento y protección constituye hoy en día un elemento fundamental de legitimización para
We
los
must
sistemas
understand that
políticos
recent global
democráticos.
processes have had a strong impact on
Tanto
discussion
del
on
ámbito
human
interno en
rights.
cada país
For
como
some
ante la comunidad
analysts,
internacional.
the end of the Cold War and the fall of the regimes
Debemos
of real
entender
socialism
que los
constitute a
recientes
new
procesos
substantive
globales
advance in global
ha tenido
process.
fuerte impacto en la
We
discusión
must
sobre
understand
los
that
derechos
in the
humanos.
current globalization
Para algunos
progress,
analistas,
there have been a
el fin de
number
la Guerra
of
Fría
events that
y de la
have
caída de
significantly
la Unión
impacted
Soviética
human rights.
constituyen
So
un
for
nuevo
some
avance sustantivo
scholars,
en
they
los
believe
procesos
that
globales.
with the end of the Cold
En
War
varios
and the
países
collapse
se
of some
profundizó
socialist
la
countries,
apertura al libre mercado.
that is a new advance in
Se plantea
global
el triunfo
process.
del
In several
capitalismo
countries,
occidental, abriendo paso
the
a la
opening to the free
globalización,
market deepened,
entendida también como la
and the triumph
occidentalización del
of
mundo.
Western capitalism is
Si
proposed,
bien
opening the
se
way to
reconoce el valor que
globalization.
tienen los derechos humanos
So,
en los
to some
procesos de liberación que se
extent,
vienen
we
desarrollando
understand
en
this process
diferentes
as
partes
a
del
sort of a
mundo,
westernization of the
Junto
world,
a ello
as
se
believed
denuncia
by
que
some
lo mismo se
scholars.
dio también
While
a
recognizing the
los intereses del
value of
capitalismo
human rights in the liberation process that
Desde
are
esta
taking place in
perspectiva,
different
los
parts
derechos
of the
humanos han
world,
servido como discurso
it
ideológico
is also denounced
para
that they have
intervenir en la
also served the
realidad
interest of
a
globalized
partir de los
capitalism.
intereses de las clases sociales que
For
detengan
this
el poder
perspective, human rights
y de
has
la
served as
ideología y
an
la cultura
ideological
dominante.
discourse to intervene
contexto global,
based on the
de hecho,
interest of the social
buena parte
classes
de
that
la
hold power,
práctica y lógica
ideology, and the
claramente
dominant culture.
violatorias de la dignidad de la persona no son identificadas en los discursos oficiales como
In the global
violación de los
context,
derechos.
in fact, many
Todo
of the
ello obliga
practices
a
and
no pocos
logics
actores
that
sociales
clearly
bien a
violate
tomar
the
distancia
dignity
de los
of
derechos
persons
humanos como
are
referente
not
para su
identified
lucha,
in official
o bien
discourses
intentar
as a
una
violation of
reformulación de
rights.
su concepto, de
All
manera
this
que pueda
forces
ser
many
apropiado por
social
los
actors
sectores
either to
vulnerables
distance
de
themselves
nuestra
from human
sociedad.
rights as a reference for their struggles
Es
or to try
importante
to
destacar que ante este
reformulate
Cuando
their
menos
concept so
complejo
that
resulta
it can be
necesario superar el error
reappropriated
de
by the
creer que
vulnerable
toda
sectors of our
referencia a los derechos
society.
humanos está
It is important to
animada
emphasize
por una
that faced with this
intencionalidad
panorama, at least complex panorama, it's necessary to overcome the error of the believing that any reference to human rights is animated by critical intention. Human rights are not critical per se. Human rights can serve a praxis of liberation or to legitimize and reinforce process of oppression of one class to another. So the discourse of rights is an area of dispute, of power struggle, and may or may not be functional to the processes of struggle carried out by the different social subjects. The reference to human rights has served as a factor of legitimization of capitalism and neo-colonial practices, both nationally and internationally, but also as a factor of animation of struggles aimed at transforming the current system of socio-economic relations, as well as an instrument of protection of the critical social groups that lead those struggles against those who hold power. Based on the above, it would be irresponsible to simply consider abandoning the human rights narrative. Therefore, it's necessary to think about the conditions for its reconstruction from an emancipatory perspective. For this reason, it's necessary to identify and comfort the theories that underlie a use of rights as a factor of perpetuation of the current relations of domination that cross our societies. At the same time, we need to articulate a reflection that allows to stimulate the potentialities that the reference to human rights has for liberating practices. In this way, we can observe that in the Latin American context, marked by its various processes of struggle to reconfigure, among other elements, the state and the citizenship itself in order to settle historical debts that have shaped our societies. The concept of globalization, the concept of human rights, opens the way to different connotations, which derives in a multiple spectrum of possibilities and views of analysis of the relationship between them and their implications. Understanding the basis of the concept of human rights is the recognition of the dignity of human being. These rights are a product assimilated into the collective consciousness of the historical struggle of social groups to impose and defend them. It's important to recognize that behind this concept of human rights, there are two elements that are essential. One is a historical dimension, the other one is a value system. From historical dimension, we believe that being a product of human behavior and activity, they have a historical dimension. And in terms of value system, it underlies the idea of a value system that could constitute a common ideal for all peoples and nations. There are thus several criteria for classifying human rights. The following is the most comprehensive and corresponds to the order of appearance, configuring 3 generations in historical terms of human rights, where we find the following. The first generation, fundamental civil and political rights. The second generation is for economic, social, and cultural rights. And then the third generation, rights of the people. Entering the route of our analysis, we can observe that Latin America, being one of the regions of the world where the promotion and protection of human rights are issues of continuous demand and critical discussion in the national agenda of the Latin American states, due to the worrying breaches of obligations of respect and guarantee of human rights of their populations, but also because of the changes that internal policies are experiencing, where economic interests are privileged that are far from putting human dignity as a beacon of the actions of the state. And within the multiple problems that affect Latin American countries that require individual and collective actions from states, international cooperation, civil society, it's inevitable to highlight those that have to do with a phenomena of structural, social, economic, political, environmental order which affect numerous populations, social groups, and the conditions of development and human survival. For we see that indicators used to measure inequalities show unseemly levels that do not comfort with economic growth and wealth created. Hence,
muestran niveles indecorosos que no se compadecen con el crecimiento económico.
These issues affect different groups of people and their, in both their livelihood and also their developments. We also see that there is a very severe inequality of wealth among different groups of people. Now, we can say that a Latin American area is the least equal place in the world. And in Latin America, there are two systematic realities of human rights violations that have forced its inhabitants to migrate. They are those generated by the state crisis that the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is going through, and by the so-called Central American immigration from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, bound for the United States of America through its borders with Mexico. Of course, the decision to leave their homes is not a free and spontaneous decision, but on the contrary, under pressure to satisfy at least the basic needs of themselves and their families, or to at least pursue some minimum security conditions. Which cannot be safeguarded within their own countries. And actually, in addition to this, we see that in recent years, the defense of human rights in Latin America has become a high-risk work, as attacks against defenders of victims of dispossession or forced displacement of the environment, of fauna, and of ethnic communities are increasingly recurrent. So it cannot be ignored that many promises have been broken on the discourse of human rights, and that the institutions that they assumed to vanish from America. As I said, some of these attacks against human rights defenders are actually coming from the dark forces that I see in their work. And many of the promises to protecting human and promoting human rights were not honored. And we also see that there are some economic problems in the Latin American countries because the limited leadership of the government. In this context, we can affirm that the growing public spending as a proportion of the GDP and the considerable increase in social spending after the COVID pandemic since 2020, which is largely social investment in an art, these kind of phenomena are not accidental. Recognizing that neither is the implementation of active transfer policies towards the most vulnerable sectors, advances in the right to health and social security with solidarity components, and a greater universal vacation and the greater presence of recognition of inequalities and differences in terms of gender, ethnicity, culture, territory, and age. It's highly urgent and necessary to try to mitigate inequalities, and efforts to date have failed to reduce the level of social inequality and poverty in two dimensions. Which are poverty and extreme poverty, which translate into a constant violation of human rights in Latin America. This is a situation that originates the needs to immigrate outside the destinations of origin in search of a new and better life.
más 82 millones de personas, donde podemos
Ecological projects that are, by the end of 2022, poverty stood at 32.1% of the population and extreme poverty at 13.1%, namely 82 million. That is a slight decrease in the level of poverty and a slight increase in extreme poverty compared to that of 2021.
Comparing with the pre-COVID, there is the additional 15 million people now living in poverty. According to the UN data, the economic recovery of 2021 was achieved in Latin America, which is not enough to mitigate the profound social and labor impacts of the COVID. And we are faced with income, gender inequality, poverty, informality, and vulnerability. And the ECLAC's Executive Secretary, Madam Alicia, called for the maintaining of the emergency cash transfers in 2022 or until the health crisis was under control. And this is the main reasons for the increase of migratory flows in Latin America. They are forced to find a better life in other areas.
Pues obviamente se encuentra la pobreza crónica,
We need
la inestabilidad
to
política y
rise
social,
to the
la
occasion
precariedad del empleo y la
because
asimetría en la
the migrants
distribución de
are
los
forced
beneficios
to make options
ofrecidos
like
por la economía
poverty,
internacional, esta última
instability,
agudizada por el proceso
unstable
de
job
globalización.
market, income gap for a long
En el
time.
mundo,
And they also
más de
choose very
281
dangerous
de
route
inmigrantes
to get to
internacionales,
another country.
equivale al 3%
In
de la
2020,
población mundial, y cada día pues dicha cifra va
there were
aumentando.
approximately
Por eso nuestro enfoque en
281
el
million
día de hoy
international
ha
migrants,
sido que no puede haber
equivalent to 3.6% of the world's
reconocimiento de derechos
population,
humanos
and it has
sin
been
atender
rising over the
las
past
causas
5 decades.
desigualdad y de pobreza que
We
atraviesa
must
nuestra población.
adequately solve the
En ese
poverty
sentido,
and
nuevamente,
also
pues, nos queda un
the
escenario que hoy, con
the
la
migrant
importancia de este
issues.
foro internacional, marca un compromiso de análisis y compromiso real
On this
para
forum,
proteger en nuestra región y
we
en el
are
mundo
discussing
a
about
todos
human
aquellos
rights
que en su
issue.
anhelo de buscar el
I
bienestar
think
para sus
it's
seres
quite
queridos y su
a
familia
critical opportunity for
transitan hacia
us,
ese sueño.
and we need also
Así
to
pues,
take
para nosotros
it as a
nos sumamos a
foundation
la defensa de los derechos humanos,
for the
pero
better
bajo el
life of
enfoque
people,
de
and we need
atender
to
las
work harder
desigualdades sociales,
towards this
políticas y
goal.
económicas. Muchas gracias.
We need to address inequalities. Thank you.
感谢库珀先生的精彩发言。现在有请津巴布韦执政党民盟中央政治局委员、新闻宣传书记兼发言人、前驻华大使克里斯托弗·穆茨万格瓦先生发言。每位嘉宾的发言时间为8分钟。Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Please welcome Mr. Christopher Haptekua Mutsvangwa, member of Political Bureau of the Central Committee of the Democratic League, ruling party of Zimbabwe, secretary and spokesman for news and publicity, and former ambassador to China. And the time for each speech is 8 minutes.
Thank you so much. I recognized Mr. Shulei, the member of the Politburo of the CPC of China, Mr. Ma Zhaoxi, Executive Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lu Zhaohui, the Director of China International Development Corporations, as well as the representative of the United Nations Secretary General, and all the delegates who are here. I pay special gratitude to our hosts who are the Minister of Foreign Affairs and China Xinhua News Agency. Ever since I served as ambassador to China in 2002, the Minister of Foreign Affairs has always positively handled any advice on how Harare-Beijing relations can best be improved. As a result, we are reaching out to ever new heights in our bilateral relations between Harare and Beijing. I used to be the chief executive of the National Broadcasting Company of Zimbabwe. I fully appreciate the fresh, positive, informative, and sympathetic coverage of global affairs that is the new hallmark of China-Xinhua news agents. They have eradicated a media pandemic which was called Afro-pessimism, always trying to make Africa look foolish in global affairs, as is done by the CNN and the BBC. That is over. Thanks very much to Xinhua news agents and others, of course. Chinese hosts, delegates, comrades, and friends, I greet you from the many nations and the various regions which are here. I want to start by paying particular homage to His Excellency, Chairman Xi Jinping, the President of the People's Republic of China. He is espousing bold and visionary leadership in the fine tradition that we have come to expect from the Communist Party of China, be it in war, before they were free, in peace, and now in national development on the global stage. Yesterday, we all listened to this wholesome goodwill message from President Xi Jinping. This August forum was most delighted. I also extend warm and heartfelt welcome to the delegates to this historic city of Beijing, which is modernizing at a very rapid pace. I also extend similar gratitude to the Chinese government for setting up the China-Africa Forum in 2002. Before that, no major power ever bothered about Africa. Today, it has become de rigueur and fashionable for capitals of leading nations to host summits with African leaders, even to address the African Union. It just never used to happen. Thank you, China. As they say, imitation is the best form of flattery. And what you have shown to the global powers is that Africa matters. I'm very grateful, and Africa is forever thankful to China. Even now, as things stand, Washington also has summits with African leaders. Before, African leaders, diplomats would go and see junior officials in Washington. Today, African leaders are entertained in the capital of the superpower of the world. This is a good thing. There's an American singer called Bob Dylan. He would say, the times, they are changing. My pride of recognition goes to the hardworking people of China. In a mere 40 years, you have vaulted China to second global economy, valiantly fought to eradicate poverty, and contributed to 40% of global annual growth in recent times. This forum is about human rights. China's performance is the brightest shining star in the Committee of Nations. Zimbabwe is particularly delighted with the Vienna Declaration of Human Rights 60 years ago. Remember, we are number 3 as the last born African country. If it was not for the United Nations Charter and this declaration, maybe it would have been more difficult for Zimbabwe to become a free country. So we are a child of this human rights declaration made 60 years ago. We fought a bitter armed struggle for our freedom, and we were supported by a then very poor China, struggling with its economy, but it was charitable enough to come to the help of Zimbabwe. The CPC has charted a blazing trail of cooperation with Africa, properly and squarely adapting and responding to changing times and new responsibilities. I repeat, this forum is focused on human rights and the allegiance of the pursuit of the Vienna Declaration and program of human rights under the auspices of the United Nations Organization. This vital document captures the universal aspirations of all humanity in the endeavor of common progress and shared prosperity. As Africans, we owe our sovereignty to the precepts of the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action. We need to jealously defend its integrity against new forms of dangerous tendencies by isolationists, particularly in the West. There are those in Washington, London, and Brussels who now espouse some version of a new rules-based international order. We say no to that. The only document which matters is this document which we are paying homage to, all of us. Nobody should have a unilateral change to what is the Vienna Declaration on Human Rights. We will not accept a caricature other than this document. I changed my speech to say Zimbabwe is a case study of how China has consistently cooperated with our country to make it survive in difficult diplomatic and international circumstances. The Global Security Initiative, as well as the Belt and Road Initiative, spell out a vision of shared safety and development agenda among nations. Zimbabwe and China have a long history of cooperation in defense and security matters dating to pre-independence. For your own information, my president, Dr. Emerson Damzo Mnangagwa, is the only survivor of the first batch of military cadres when we were forming our guerrilla army to train in China in 1964. He trained in Nanjing. 10 years later, I also left university to go and join the struggle with thousands of many other young people in Zimbabwe. All of you, of course, will remember how Bob Marley sang about Zimbabwe and its military struggle against the British Imperial Army of Rhodesia. Thanks to this effort today, Zimbabwe is a tried and tested nation that jealously safeguards its independence and sovereignty. We owe a lot to China as a teacher and as a supporter during those difficult times. In human resources today, Zimbabwe boasts one of Africa's, if not Africa's, highest literacy rate. We owe this stellar achievement, recognized by UNESCO, to the fact that our people were organized during the war. You can't win a war against Britain, a modern imperial army, unless you get organized. So Zimbabweans are very organized as a population. And we use that organizational capacity of Zimbabwe to deliver on education for our people. That's why we are top in Africa today. We tapped this experience. Our villagers built schools for free using the experience of the war. And the central government supplied the teachers as a reward for building schools for free. So everybody was building schools. We had to go back to Havana where we trained as military cadres. We converted our former military camps into teacher training camps. We trained over 7,000 teachers in Havana in order to catch up with our parents building schools for free in Zimbabwe. That's why where we are today. We are one of the best educated African countries because of the organization which we had during the war. In fact, at that time, the budget of the nation was so small, we just dedicated it to teachers. The parents, the villagers built schools for free. We also used our strong state from the army, from the guerrilla army, to do land distribution. You can see the challenges which subsequent countries in Namibia and South Africa are having about land distribution. In Zimbabwe, we did it. We have a very strong state which made it possible, because you cannot realize human development, human rights, unless the people have got a relationship with their land. And that's what Zimbabwe has done. So when we carried out the land reform in 2000, the Western countries were offended. They imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe. We are the most continuously sanctioned country in the world after Cuba. 22 years of Western sanctions. Delegates will be you delegates will be relieved to know that we have survived. But more than that, we are now thriving despite those sanctions. We thank China for helping us withstand and now defy the wrath of the West against Zimbabwe. The most important rescue was Zimbabwe's access to the Chinese capital markets. Now you can go to New York. If you can't, you go to London. If you can't, you go to Tokyo. But you can also go to Shanghai. You can also go to Shenzhen to get capital. This has been one of the best contributions of China in terms of human development. Access to capital, cheap capital for Africa. Away with this nonsense that China is having a debt trap. We are thriving, our economy is doing well because we are getting capital from China. And I'm going to cite instances. Tobacco cooperation. Everybody who is a smoker knows the best blended tobacco is from Zimbabwe. Best cigarettes, they carry Zimbabwean leaf tobacco. That industry had collapsed at our land reform in 2000. In 2004, in 2005, when I was ambassador, we invited the biggest tobacco company in the world, China Tobacco, to go and help the new Zimbabwe farmers grow tobacco leaves for the world market. You will be happy today that over 180,000 families are thriving out of tobacco leaf production, as opposed to a mere 4,000 white former colonial farmers. This has distributed wealth to the majority of rural people in Zimbabwe. Over $1 billion a year are given to the poor people of Zimbabwe because of this decision by China and China Tobacco. And the Western companies came back to Zimbabwe when they isolated the market. This saved our land reform program. If we had not got the support of China Tobacco and the Chinese government, our land reform program was going to collapse and the West would have recolonized our country because it would have failed. We have two other instances which I would want to cite. Carbon steel production. This year, Zimbabwe starts producing carbon steel production again. We are working with the largest steel company from China and Indonesia called Tsingshan. We will become a major producer. Maybe in the next 5 to 6 years we'll be as good as Russia or Turkey, or in the next 10 years in carbon steel production. Without steel, it's very difficult to build a modern country. Zimbabwe is doing that. We want to thank China for giving Zimbabwe, because we have the resources. We have the carbon, we have the iron ore, we have the coal, we have the ferrochrome, which is one of the best in the world. All these are in Zimbabwe. And we are going to become the largest steel producer in Africa and the most efficient on the African continent. This will also have implications for our neighbor Mozambique. The ports of Mozambique save Zimbabwe. We are landlocked. If Zimbabwe is not functioning well, Mozambique cannot prosper. So China has got a big dividend in infrastructure. You know how to build infrastructure, the railways, the roads, the water, the electricity generation. All these things will come to Zimbabwe so that we become a modern country. We are very happy with our relations with China. We have lithium in abundance in Zimbabwe, and China is now the leader in the new electric vehicles. They own most of the intellectual property in new electric vehicles. 5 to 6 billionaires from China are in Zimbabwe today, plowing billions into the beneficiation, not just raw export of ore, but beneficiation of lithium. Maybe what Moscow and Riyadh do with fossil fuels, Zimbabwe is going to do with new energy batteries. We are happy with our cooperation with China in this field. We are also working on our currency. We have always been under attack by the West with inflation, which was record in the world. We had inflation faster than the speed of light in 2008. How physics can allow that, nobody knows. But anyway, the West was playing with our currency to make sure Zimbabwe collapses. We are now using gold to support our currency because Zimbabwe's history is the history of gold. If you see the Zimbabwe civilization in sub-Saharan Africa, it is one of the most dominant in Africa, with a lot of citadels coming from the medieval era of more than 16,000 people. We traded gold with India, with Somalia, with Egypt, with Iran, with Turkey, even as far as China and Indonesia. We traded gold. Now we are digging gold because in Zimbabwe, gold is everywhere. We dig gold everywhere. We are now at 35 tons. We are going to 60 tons, and we'll be going to 100 tons. Gold is the original money. We are going to use it to support our currency and fight off against US inflation. We are going to cooperate with China to make sure that we increase our gold production so that we have a strong currency which is not under the influence of another country. I just want to say we have the privilege of exporting in order to earn hard currency. But Zimbabwe has the additional privilege of actually digging money from the ground in big quantities, and we are happy with that. It will give us the freedom which we want. Now we are even experimenting with a digital dollar to support our currency. Somebody in Washington, at the Federal Reserve Bank in Washington, is not very happy with that. But look, this is our privilege. God gave us the gold. I want to end up my speech by saying, nothing succeeds like success. We are seeing the Western countries beginning to come back to Zimbabwe because they wanted a regime change to remove the Zimbabwe government, to remove our government. They failed. We want to thank China for the role which you have done to help Zimbabwe become a shining star once again. Next month, we are going for elections in Zimbabwe. We pride ourselves as being a guerrilla movement which was on the verge of military conquest in 1979. But we accepted elections as the route to power. We hold elections religiously since 1980, and we are winning, and we will win again this time because democracy is good for the people of Zimbabwe, and it can come in many ways. It can come in many manifestations. Elections are also good, and we practice elections in Zimbabwe. We want to say to the delegates, thank you, President Xi Jinping, for the wonderful things which you have been doing. He took particular interest in the building of a steel plant in Zimbabwe. I was here in Beijing in 2014 when he allowed the Dayutai guest house to become a host for the luncheon of the investor of Tsingshan Steel to meet our then president. He met our president, new president, after 2018. And today we are where we are because he's taken a particular interest in the affairs of my country. It's a big country. We are not 1.2 billion people, 1.4 billion. We are only 17 million people. But President Xi Jinping do care about our country. We are happy about that. Thank you, the Communist Party of China, and thank you, the people of China. And salute to the delegates.
感谢穆茨万格瓦先生的精彩发言。现在有请西班牙芝华讲堂副主席拉蒙·玛利亚·卡尔杜克先生发言。Thank you for the wonderful speech, Mr. Mutsvangwa. Let's invite Mr. Ramon Maria Caldo-Vanos, Vice President, Cathedral China, to give a speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. For sure, no more than 8 minutes. Good morning to all. Buenos días a todas y todos. Nishemen, Shanshemen, Tajahau. La salud y el bienestar pueden ser analizados desde diferentes perspectivas.
Thank you very much for the wonderful sharing. Actually, human rights are cultural issues, economic supervision, and also about human development, and can be interpreted from different perspectives as a philosophical issue, a cultural fact, a political debate, a matter of economic regulation. So we are here today in focusing on health as a matter of law. We deliberately leave aside the philosophical, cultural, and political debate on health in order to focus on its legal nature within the framework of current law. The ultimate purpose of the right to health are to save life, to restore health, to maintain health, and to alleviate suffering. However, the right to health cannot be right to be healthy, but to have the available, accessible, acceptable, and quality decisions, means, and resources to ensure the highest attainable standard of health. This right contains freedom and protective measures. Freedom such as the individual's control over his or her own body and health, to information related to his or her health, and to refuse treatment, among others. And measures of protection related to access to the means and resources that allow them to maintain or try to recover their health, understanding access not only as access itself, but also as the opportunity, availability, effectiveness, and efficiency of health services. We start from the basis of the acceptance of human rights, and for this, the first requirement is to make explicit conviction in human rights, both morally and legally. This declaration implies not only an ethical but also a legal acceptance of human rights, with the attendant obligations, such as acceptance of the subject as a holder of human rights, the need for a framework of legal enforceability, and the definition of the legal good to be protected. On the other hand, the acceptance of health as a human right includes the acceptance of the enforceability of such a right from the state, especially when the development of international human rights instruments specifies the duties of the states. These treaties are not mere moral exhortations or declarations of goodwill, but constitute legal obligations that states must fulfill based on the principle of pacta sunt servanda. The state, through treaties at the international level and through constitutional law at the domestic level, binds itself to rights that are considered fundamental. Human rights are not a closed list, but the number and content of these rights is increasing and widening with the moral and economic progress of mankind. A criterion to which one could add the following: the number and content of human rights is increasing and widening with the moral and economic progress of mankind. This criterion could be added to that of scientific and technological progress. Human rights derive from the notion of human dignity, the content of which has been clarified in a growing historical process. In the case of health, although it appears to be mostly related to the so-called social rights, in a broader reading and a careful look at international human rights law, it's clear and conclusive that health exists as a right, and it goes beyond the framework of social rights. Like each and every other right, it is a right or as its own personality, and therefore as a subject of a particular legal protection. So health as a right is a right that is universal. Without accepting the universality of this right, there's no such right. And we must find a science-based evidence to support this definition. And the traditional medicine is quite popular now. Most people believe that traditional medicine is also a science. It's a very valuable supplement of modern Western medicine. And WHO has been actively promoting the development of traditional medicine, and they redefine the scope of traditional medicine, bringing together the medical treatment using these traditional materials, flora and fauna, and minerals to increase the health level of people. It is quite explicit, and it means many things. And the traditional Chinese medicine and herb treatment and other traditional medicines are all natural, and chiropractor and other puncture, they're all natural treatments. And there are a lot of reports in that regard, including the herb evaluation report in 1996 and many others. And many of these reports are important documents to demonstrate how traditional medicines can play their role. And the latest one was published in 2013, makes recommendations to countries to be implemented in period 2014-2023. And for the 76th WHO Assembly, held very recently, in May of this year, 2023, this 2014-2023 strategy has just been extended for another year, and
A new strategy for 2025 to 2034 will be discussed at the 77th WHO Assembly to be held in May next year. In order not to violate people's fundamental rights, it would be necessary for the countries to become aware of the importance of regulating these therapies, both in their practice and in their learning, and to guarantee the protection of their citizens in terms of health with good practice and truly informed health advice, from which people can decide how they want to take care of their health. In conclusion, the freedom of therapeutic choice and the regulation of traditional, complementary and integrative medicine by states are part of the rights of individuals under international human rights law and should be guaranteed and be claimed before international bodies. Thank you.
感谢拉蒙·玛利亚·卡尔杜克先生的精彩发言。接下来有请中国人权研究会副会长、吉林大学教授鲁广锦先生发言。Thank you, Mr. Ramon Maria Calduk-Fanos. Next, let's welcome Mr. Lu Guangjin, Vice President, China Society for Human Rights Studies and Professor of the School of Law in Jilin University. Let's welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning. On June the 14th, 1993, the Second World Conference on Human Rights was held in Vienna. This will always be a memorable day in the history of human rights development, during which representatives from over 180 countries and regions, including China, attended this conference, and with more than 7,000 delegates attending the event. And the VDPA is the final document adopted at the conference. It is a milestone. History is always in strikingly resemblance. Since the end of the Second World War, there are two declarations having a particularly important impact on the history of human rights. One is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the other is VDPA. I believe that if the Universal Declaration is the outcome of the victory of the anti-fascist war that highlights the universality of human rights, then the VDPA can be deemed as the outcome of the end of the Cold War for nearly 50 years, emphasizing equality and indivisibility, interdependence and interrelatedness of all human rights on the basis of universality. We found among the two documents it is not difficult to understand the ideological trajectory and historical context. The obvious fact is that the international community, inspired by the spirit of the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, has made great efforts to explore models, paths for the effective promotion and protection of human rights in the past 30 years. Human rights civilization is richer in diversity, and the achievements in the development of human rights in the world are impressive. Global inequality, which has plagued human development for a long time, decreased. According to statistics, the actual income of over 60% of the world's population increased by 40 to 75% during the past 20 years. From 1988 to 2008, coming from Asian countries, mainly such as China, India, Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia. The income of the bottom 10 of these countries has obtained real growth, especially in China, considering that it has solved the absolute poverty and lifted nearly 800 million people out of poverty in decades following the completion of its historical task. The average lifespan of humans continues to increase due to the precise improvement of development and security. Research shows that the average lifespan of a human was only 15 years old in the primitive society and only 25 years old in ancient times. It was 64 years in 1990, and it was over 73 years in 2019. And in 2021, it's 78.2 years in China. And also, due to the continuous growth of lifespan, there are currently 8 billion people all over the world. Meanwhile, we also should note that there are still many issues that cannot be ignored. Refugees exist because of regional conflicts and poverty, increased due to the widening of development gap and the prevailing of COVID-19. The right to life of ethnic minorities is trampled because of ceaseless racial discrimination. The development is unsustainable due to climate warming and environmental degradation. All these issues make it more urgent and difficult to protect basic human rights and improve human welfare. There are 3 basic facts that can provide us with clearer understanding of a human rights situation. First, the Human Development Index, the HDI, is declining. In September 2022, the UNDP released the latest Human Development Report, which is the first data updated since COVID-19. It shows the global Human Development Index has declined for the first time for 2 consecutive years since the records began due to COVID-19. And also, there was decline in 2020 and 2021. Second, the number of people affected by hunger has risen. According to the WFP's data, in 2021, people affected by hunger reached 828 million, an increase of about 46 million compared with 2020, and a cumulative increase of 150 million since the outbreak of COVID-19. And nearly 900 million are suffering severe food insecurity, an increase of 207 million over the past 2 years. And also, the third is climate change has a significant impact. The period from 2015 to 2022 was the hottest 8 years since records began in 1850. And more people are becoming climate refugees, and they become destitute and homeless. All this show that there is still much work to do by the international community to promote global human rights governance. And in the face of so many challenges, we also feel deeply the importance of the spirit of the VDPA. VDPA plays a critical role in promoting the world's development and safeguarding human rights. To commemorate this document, we should put more emphasis on the universality, equality, and balance of human rights. Facing the inequality and imbalance of the development of human rights, the international community should stand on the same position, attach equal importance to human rights, and comprehensively view human rights with a fair and equal attitude. Second, we should pay more attention to the implementation and protection of the right to development. It is an important component of fundamental human rights. We should adhere to people-centered development concept and promote the high-quality, inclusiveness, and sustainability of development. Third, we should pay more attention to the protection of human rights and strengthen solidarity instead of seeking confrontation or using human rights as political tool or weapon or guise. We need to actually carry out cooperation on an equal basis and to inject positive energy to international cooperation in this area. Thank you.
感谢陆广锦先生的精彩发言。接下来有请联合国经济社会及文化权利委员会专家、毛里求斯人权领域专家阿斯拉夫·阿利考奈先生发言。Thank you for the wonderful speech, Mr. Liu. Let's invite Mr. Ashraf Ali Kaunai, expert of the United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and an expert on human rights of Mauritius. Let's welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action constituted, no doubt, a vital milestone for the global implementation of human rights norms and standards by the international community. It is useful to recall that the Declaration asserted that human rights are the birthright of all human beings and enshrined the principle that human rights are indeed universal, indivisible, and interdependent. Besides elevating the role of economic, social, and cultural rights, it reaffirmed the right to development as being a universal and inalienable right, and for that purpose, the human person always remains central and pivotal objective of any development. The Declaration also highlighted the importance of international cooperation, which is crucial and a matter of priority in order to achieve a global realization and implementation of human rights. This forum brings together the international community 30 years after the Vienna Declaration in order to survey the current global situation and to discuss the pressing challenges with which we are presently confronted. This is indeed a highly laudable initiative and a unique opportunity to reflect upon and consider the way forward, both from an international and domestic perspective. Although much progress has been achieved since the Vienna Declaration, there are at present some serious obstacles and challenges to the effective protection of human rights worldwide. There are new technologies which present new risks for human rights. There is, for instance, a dangerous spread of disinformation and hate speech on digital platforms. The emergence of artificial intelligence requires a critical reflection which is necessary in the context of a new scientific outlook into the future. There are serious issues of concern arising from climatic changes and environmental threats. There are also gross and systematic violations of human rights in various parts of the world, in utter disregard and violation of international human rights norms and standards. These occur alarmingly during armed conflicts in the form of genocide or ethnic cleansing. Such a situation unduly exposes women, particularly to sexual violence, and often creates a mass exodus of displaced persons, which affect in particular children, the elderly, and disabled persons. There are also other forms of human rights violations which are matters of grave concern. These involve, amongst others, racial discrimination, xenophobia, terrorism, extreme poverty, hunger, lack of access to water and health care, as well as other denials of economic, social, and cultural rights. These have been indeed brought into sharper focus during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. The Vienna Declaration had emphasized that it is the duty of every state to provide an effective framework of remedies to redress human rights grievances or violations. The approach to any action in that respect may be twofold. One, at the national level, and secondly, by way of international cooperation at the international level. But the overarching principle in respect to both national and international actions is equality, which is indeed one of the main themes of this forum today. It is a most important condition in order to achieve equality that there be an eradication of all forms of discrimination and intolerance. There is also an imperative need to afford greater protection to the more vulnerable and disadvantaged groups of society. The Vienna Declaration had already listed some of these categories, but the list may be updated to include all marginalized and vulnerable groups, in particular the population which lives below the poverty line and which suffers from social exclusion. In order to fulfill its obligations to ensure the realization and observance of human rights, it is incumbent upon each state to implement an action plan and ensure the allocation of maximum available resources to achieve progressively the realization of human rights set out in the international human rights instruments. These would include the right to an adequate standard of living, the rights to food, health care, education, housing, and all the necessary social services. Each state would also need to constantly review and strengthen its institutional and legal framework in order to afford an effective protection of human rights indiscriminately to all its citizens. This would require appropriate legislation, adequate legal framework, the allocation of adequate resources in order to set up the rule of law, an independent judiciary, and a national human rights institutions. It is also essential to develop an educational and training system which raises awareness of and respect for all human rights at all levels. The state would also need to enlist for that purpose the participation and contribution of civil society, the media, and all segments of its population in the implementations of its human rights policies and actions. As I had already indicated, international cooperation is vital in order to be able to deal effectively with all the current threats to human rights presented by climatic changes and new technologies. There are also numerous other challenges which call for international concerted action in the field of human rights. These arise essentially in connection with international conflicts and tensions, mass displacement of refugees, natural disasters, terrorism, poverty, hunger, and other afflictions which are present in various parts of the world. There is, therefore, as a result, a crucial need for concerted international action to spell out and implement the pivotal role of human rights in addressing all these challenges at the international level. States need for that purpose to strengthen and develop common strategies, cooperation and assistance based on dialogue and mutual respect together with other states, specialized international agencies, human rights institutions, both regional and international, in order to improve the collective global capacity to develop the implementation of human rights standards, which are vital for global human rights governance. This would require a review of the existing body of international human rights instruments in order to further develop and strengthen the international enforcement mechanisms. States must be encouraged to ratify and adhere to all international human rights instruments and protocols, and to incorporate these standards embodied in these international human rights instruments into their own domestic legislation. States must also be encouraged to comply with their reporting and monitoring obligations prescribed under the international law and the United Nations Treaty Bodies mechanism. States must endeavor to mobilize and allocate maximum resources for the empowerment and functioning in promoting global human rights enforcement and governance. There is no doubt that a lot has been achieved in the field of international human rights since the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action, which was adopted in June 1993. But we are now confronted with pressing challenges which can only be met by the international community adopting a comprehensive and holistic approach to ensure the protection of human rights, both at the national and international level. I thank you for your attention.
感谢考奈先生和各位来宾的精彩发言。现在进入20分钟的茶歇时间，请大家稍事休息。Thank you, Mr. Karnai, and all of you for the insightful ideas. And now we have a 20-minute tea break. Thank you.
"只有各国人民都过上好日子，繁荣才能持久，安全才有保障，人权才有基础。"
In today's China, under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, the fate of countless people has been changed. China's human rights cause has achieved all-round development. China takes a people-centered approach and stays committed to boosting human rights with development, providing inspirations for other developing countries.
We believe that China, with its experience of defeating poverty, can provide a good model and good support to developing countries in coming out of this.
Така че това, че Китай действително ликвидира абсолютната бедност, т.е. достигна така нареченото общество сялка, действително това е един абсолютен успех. Това бих казал постижение не само за Китай, а за цялото човечество.
消除绝对贫困是中国民生改善的里程碑，是中国人权事业的历史性成就，也是人类进步事业的壮丽篇章。
China has been upholding the common values of humanity featuring peace, development, equity, justice, democracy and freedom, making contributions to the advancement of global human rights, and continuously injecting new impetus into realizing the human rights goals established by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action. China has put forward the Global Development Initiative and announced 32 important measures to implement the GDI.
L'évaluation est positive
Mais cette évaluation positive aussi peut amener à penser à d'autres aspects pour avoir beaucoup plus d'effets et d'impact.
The Chinese have done a tremendous work in terms of complementing health service delivery in this country.
And I think that China's efforts at, first trying through industrial development and the building of infrastructure and other kinds of things, I think those are very useful ways to start to uplift other countries out of poverty.
China follows the Global Security Initiative to safeguard world peace and helps make the sound of peace echo throughout the world.
Ключов момент, когато ние говорим за правото на хората, това е правото на живот. А правото на живот в международен план, това означава да няма войни, да има мир.
We're not going to build what needs to be built if we don't have a peaceful world.
I think China, in many cases, have shown the usage of Chinese power, right? But especially China's sovereign and smart power as a way that has made you a solution provider for regional and world affairs.
China has long spoken out for developing countries, supporting them in safeguarding their own interests and opposing Western countries in politicizing human rights issues and interfering in developing countries' internal affairs. China opposes forcing unilateral sanctions and depriving other countries of their rights to survival and development. China urges relevant countries to stop infringing upon the human rights in other countries and respect the path of human rights development independently chosen by other peoples.
China has a very important role in general in these big political debates of our time.
China's role is important. China today is creating platforms, mechanisms, meetings, getting people together to understand the real voice of the people.
Solidarity for development, solidarity to confront epidemics, solidarity to eradicate poverty, and solidarity to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is where now the Chinese leadership came up with this idea of building a community of shared destiny for mankind.
China has blazed the path of human rights development with Chinese characteristics. It firmly supports the advancement of human rights in the vast number of developing countries and has made its contributions to breaking the discourse monopoly of the Western countries in the field of human rights and enriching the international discourse of human rights development.
Es gibt verschiedene Entwicklungen in der Realisierung der Menschenrechte.
China is a global voice, and China's voice is heard and respected.
只有各国人民都过上好日子，繁荣才能持久，安全才有保障，人权才有基础。
In today's China, under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, the fate of countless people has been changed. China's human rights cause has achieved all-round development. China takes a people-centered approach and stays committed to boosting human rights with development, providing inspirations for other developing countries.
We believe that China, with its experience of defeating poverty, can provide a good model and good support to developing countries in coming out of this.
Така че това, че Китай действително ликвидира абсолютната бедност, т.е. достигна така нареченото общество сялка, действително това е един абсолютен успех. Това бих казал постижение не само за Китай, а за цялото човечество.
消除绝对贫困是中国民生改善的里程碑，是中国人权事业的历史性成就，也是人类进步事业的壮丽篇章。
China has been upholding the common values of humanity featuring peace, development, equity, justice, democracy and freedom, making contributions to the advancement of global human rights, and continuously injecting new impetus into realizing the human rights goals established by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action. China has put forward the Global Development Initiative and announced 32 important measures to implement the GDI.
L'évaluation est positive, mais cette évaluation positive aussi peut amener à penser à d'autres aspects pour avoir beaucoup plus d'effets et d'impact.
The Chinese have done a tremendous work in terms of complementing health service delivery in this country.
And I think that China's efforts at, first trying through industrial development and the building of infrastructure and other kinds of things, I think those are very useful ways to start to uplift other countries out of poverty.
China follows the Global Security Initiative to safeguard world peace and helps make the sound of peace echo throughout the world.
Ключов момент, когато ние говорим за правото на хората, това е правото на живот. А правото на живот в международен план, това означава да няма войни, да има мир.
We're not going to build what needs to be built if we don't have a peaceful world.
I think China, in many cases, have shown the usage of Chinese power, right? But especially China's sovereign and smart power as the way that has made you a solution provider for regional and world affairs.
China has long spoken out for developing countries, supporting them in safeguarding their own interests and opposing Western countries in politicizing human rights issues and interfering in developing countries' internal affairs. China opposes forcing unilateral sanctions and depriving other countries of their rights to survival and development. China urges relevant countries to stop infringing upon the human rights in other countries and respect the path of human rights development independently chosen by other peoples.
China has a very important role in general in these big political debates of our time.
China's role is important. China today is creating platforms, mechanisms, meetings, getting people together to understand the real voice of the people.
Solidarity for development, solidarity to confront epidemics, solidarity to eradicate poverty, and solidarity to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is where now the Chinese leadership came up with this idea of building a community of shared destiny for mankind.
China has blazed the path of human rights development with Chinese characteristics. It firmly supports the advancement of human rights in the vast number of developing countries and has made its contributions to breaking the discourse monopoly of the Western countries in the field of human rights and enriching the international discourse of human rights development.
Es gibt verschiedene Entwicklungen in der Realisierung der Menschenrechte.
China is a global voice, and China's voice is heard and respected.
只有各国人民都过上好日子，繁荣才能持久，安全才有保障，人权才有基础。
In today's China, under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, the fate of countless people has been changed. China's human rights cause has achieved all-round development. China takes a people-centered approach and stays committed to boosting human rights with development, providing inspirations for other developing countries.
We believe that China, with its experience of defeating poverty, can provide a good model and good support to developing countries in coming out of this.
Така че това, че Китай действително ликвидира абсолютната бедност, т.е. достигна така нареченото общество Сяока, действително това е един абсолютен успех. Това бих казал постижение не само за Китай, а за цялото човечество.
消除绝对贫困是中国民生改善的里程碑，是中国人权事业的历史性成就，也是人类进步事业的壮丽篇章。
China has been upholding the common values of humanity featuring peace, development, equity, justice, democracy and freedom, making contributions to the advancement of global human rights, and continuously injecting new impetus into realizing the human rights goals established by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action. China has put forward the Global Development Initiative and announced 32 important measures to implement the GDI.
L'évaluation est positive, mais cette évaluation positive aussi peut amener à penser à d'autres aspects pour avoir beaucoup plus d'effets et d'impact.
The Chinese have done a tremendous work in terms of complementing health service delivery in this country.
And I think that China's efforts at, first trying through industrial development and the building of infrastructure and other kinds of things, I think those are very useful ways to start to uplift other countries out of poverty.
China follows the Global Security Initiative to safeguard world peace and helps make the sound of peace echo throughout the world.
Ключов момент, когато ние говорим за правото на хората, това е правото на живот. А правото на живот в международен план, това означава да няма войни, да има мир.
We're not going to build what needs to be built if we don't have a peaceful world.
I think China, in many cases, have shown the usage of Chinese power, right? But especially China's soft and smart power as a way that has made you a solution provider for regional and world affairs.
China has long spoken out for developing countries, supporting them in safeguarding their own interests and opposing Western countries in politicizing human rights issues and interfering in developing countries' internal affairs. China opposes forcing unilateral sanctions and depriving other countries of their rights to survival and development. China urges relevant countries to stop infringing upon the human rights in other countries and respect the path of human rights development independently chosen by other peoples.
China has a very important role in general in these big political debates of our time.
China's role is important. China today is creating platforms, mechanisms, meetings, getting people together to understand the real voice of the people.
Solidarity for development, solidarity to confront epidemics, solidarity to eradicate poverty, and solidarity to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is where now the Chinese leadership came up with this idea of building a community of shared destiny for mankind.
China has blazed the path of human rights development with Chinese characteristics. It firmly supports the advancement of human rights in the vast number of developing countries and has made its contributions to breaking the discourse monopoly of the Western countries in the field of human rights and enriching the international discourse of human rights development.
Es gibt verschiedene Entwicklungen in der Realisierung der Menschenrechte.
China is a global voice, and China's voice is heard and respected.
只有各国人民都过上好日子，繁荣才能持久，安全才有保障，人权才有基础。
In today's China, under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, the fate of countless people has been changed. China's human rights cause has achieved all-round development. China takes a people-centered approach and stays committed to boosting human rights with development, providing inspirations for other developing countries.
We believe that China, with its experience of defeating poverty, can provide a good model and good support to developing countries in coming out of this.
Така че това, че Китай действително ликвидира абсолютната бедност, т.е. достигна така нареченото общество Сяока, действително това е един абсолютен успех. Това бих казал постижение не само за Китай, а за цялото човечество.
消除绝对贫困是中国民生改善的里程碑，是中国人权事业的历史性成就，也是人类进步事业的壮丽篇章。
China has been upholding the common values of humanity featuring peace, development, equity, justice, democracy and freedom, making contributions to the advancement of global human rights, and continuously injecting new impetus into realizing the human rights goals established by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action. China has put forward the Global Development Initiative and announced 32 important measures to implement the GDI.
L'évaluation est positive, mais cette évaluation positive aussi peut amener à penser à d'autres aspects pour avoir beaucoup plus d'effets et d'impact.
The Chinese have done a tremendous work in terms of complementing health service delivery in this country.
And I think that China's efforts at, first trying through industrial development and the building of infrastructure and other kinds of things, I think those are very useful ways to start to uplift other countries out of poverty.
China follows the Global Security Initiative to safeguard world peace and helps make the sound of peace echo throughout the world.
Ключов момент, когато ние говорим за правото на хората, това е правото на живот. А правото на живот в международен план, това означава да няма войни, да има мир.
We're not going to build what needs to be built if we don't have a peaceful world.
I think China.
有请南开大学人权研究中心主任常健先生进行发言。Dear guests, welcome back. First, I would like to invite Mr. Chang Jian, Director, the Center for the Study of Human Rights at Nankai University, to give his speech. And the time for each speech is 8 minutes. Thank you.
Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, over the course of the day, I found the key word, that is cooperation. Cooperation is opposing to confrontation. So it is pertinent to paradigm. And today we're talking about cooperation and solidarity in building the new paradigm for global human rights governance. At present, the global human development is facing a range of challenges, including the sustainable development and also the generational equality and the threat of regional conflicts to people's enjoyment of peace, climate change, profound impact on the environmental rights, and new technologies' impact on humanity's enjoyment of human rights. However, the existing paradigm is encouraging confrontation, which is not favorable for addressing emerging issues of human rights. Rather, it will stoke more confrontations. In such a context, China puts forward the concept of building the community of shared future. This concept contains a completely different concept that is featured by solidarity and cooperation. It has 6 major features. Number 1, regarding the foundation of the values of human rights governance, the current concept of governance is dominated by the Western countries' values, taking their values as the universal values. And China puts forward the common values for humanity. It is not taking some localized values as global universal values. Instead, it is trying to create or foster consensus for nations and peoples with different cultural background, different values, and different faiths. It doesn't oppose to or abolish the diversity of cultures and values. It seeks commonalities. Number 2, in terms of the component of the rights of regulation of human rights, Western countries take individual rights of liberty as the core of global human rights governance. In the common vision of humanity's common future, the norms of human rights contain not only the individual freedom rights, political rights, economic, social, cultural rights, but also the decision-making, subsistence, development right, peace right, environmental rights, and also the right to these areas for all humanity. Number 3, in terms of the application of the standards, a handful of Western countries apply their own human rights modality as the only criteria and impose other countries to apply this modality, and also creates a hegemonism of human rights. And to build a community of shared future, it means to respect the diversity in choosing independently of the human rights development. It opposes the absolute monolithic mode. Due to the differences in political system, development phase, historical and cultural features, it is quite natural to have different choices on the development path of human rights. Number 4, in terms of the system, the Western developed countries are dominant, and the voice of developing countries is not expressed adequately. Therefore, the current global human rights governance has failed to convey the freedom, liberty, equality of other countries. And China proposes the concept of democratization of international relations, regardless of the size of a country, the strength, the country. All countries should have equal rights and opportunities in decision-making, and also developing countries should enjoy the equal representation and opportunity to voice their concerns, to limit the hegemony of strong powers. Number 5, now this very severe politicization in the governance, a handful of countries are taking human rights as a tool to promote their geopolitical strategy, and they defame other countries and violate other countries' rights and interests, and also use human rights as a guide. And the Chinese concept proposes the principle of objectivity, impartiality, and constructivity to replace politicization, selectivity, double standards, and to abandon Cold War mentality, power politics, and should not take human rights as a political or geographical or geopolitical tool. Number 6, some countries are leveraging their advantages as a dominator in the human rights bodies, and they have created a battlefield of human rights in the international arena. China advocates that the UN human rights mechanism should become a platform of mutual learning and dialogue and cooperation, and we advocate dialogue instead of confrontation, and consultation instead of opposition. The governance paradigm featuring solidarity and cooperation will effectively cope with the challenges, and it will promote the sound development of the human rights cause globally. In reality, the two paradigms will compete each other in the long run. However, this confrontational mode will expose many of its shortcomings and disadvantages. Standing at this crossroads, we should recognize the correct path, adapt to the historical trend, strengthen solidarity and cooperation to promote and protect human rights so that peoples of the round world can fully enjoy the human rights.
感谢常健先生的精彩发言。接下来有请叙利亚总统特别顾问布塞纳夏班女士以线上形式带来她的发言。Thank you so much, Mr. Chang. Now let's invite Ms. Buthina Shaban, Special Advisor to the Presidency of Syria, to give her statement online. Let's welcome.
Good day. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to this very important forum on global human rights and governance. I shall speak about human rights protection and how we can protect these rights. After the Second World War, the West created its own myth that it is the one who defeated Nazism and that by so doing has liberated humanity from this horrendous evil, ignoring the 20 million and above victims that the Soviet Union at the time has paid in order to defeat this evil. Since that time, Western media and educational systems were intent on presenting the USSR, the ex-Soviet Union, and its allies as enemies of freedom, while Western countries presented themselves as the only countries who present freedom, democracy, and the human rights. As UK and France were two colonial powers, and as the US was and still is the largest military power, it was certainly easy for them to try and insert these concepts in the minds of millions of people all over the world by repeating billions of times through their propaganda, which they call media, while it's truly a propaganda, about democracy, freedom, and human rights, while in the meantime killing millions of people in so many countries all over the world. This was greatly enhanced after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, which left the US as the monopolar in the world, not only militarily, but morally and mind-wise, intellectually. And here lies the danger. Global democracy became in their dictionary, or liberal democracy became in their dictionary as the only acceptable democracy and the only one that may be acknowledged by the West. Democracy became a cover page for their wars, hegemony, and colored revolution. Any other way of just governance does not count for the West. Even UN agencies derived most of their concepts and ways of work from Western sources. With the dawn of the 21st century, things started to change slowly but steadily due to two reasons. The first reason is the wars the US launched in Afghanistan, Iraq, the destruction of Libya by NATO. All these wars have made people think about what the West is doing. And of course, supporting the apartheid regime in Palestine and its genocide against the indigenous Palestinian people. Second reason is the rise of China. As the alternative discourse China and Russia started to offer, particularly after the Russian operation in the Ukraine and after the emergence of BRICS and Shanghai, and that most people in the world started to find an alternative to Western discourse, to Western organization. And one should say that the speeches of the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping, offered an extremely attractive alternative, as he often promotes democracy and the human rights, which are homebred in their own cultural, historical, and civilizational context, as opposed to liberal democracy. By so doing, Mr. Jinping undermined the very concept of liberal democracy, or at least demonstrated that one size does not fit all, or it should not fit all. He and other leaders and writers around the world started to question Western hegemony over narrative and values, and started offering their own healthy alternatives, which are well received by most people all over the world. Today, as we are talking, the West has taken a very aggressive and dangerous step in the effort to breathe life to its hegemony over the world by trying to change the narrative of human beings under the pretext of human rights. Human rights today need to be protected truly and seriously. We all watched COVID-19 and watched the performance of Western countries and how the first and easiest victims of COVID-19 were the elderly people. Now, there is another weak and fragile strata of a human society that is being subjected to Western aggression. This strata is the children who are not able to make their own decisions and who are being victimized by the West. The introduction of asexual curricula to kindergartens and elementary schools is a great violation of children's rights to live their own childhood without coercion and without subjecting them to concepts or decisions they are certainly not fit to make. If court justices do not punish a child under 18 with the same punishment they give to a man over 18, how on earth can we expect children to make decisions about their own sexuality, about their emotional and sexual identity? Why the West is trying to impose this on the entire world? If a kid in the US or Western countries cannot have a glass of beer under 18, how do we introduce to him a curricula that is inciting him, not only allowing him, but inciting him or her to make a decision about their sexuality and about their identity? The trend in the West now, this trend in the West is more dangerous than all the military wars they have started almost everywhere in the world. And it's more destructive because this time it targets our humanity. This war is directed against our humanity and against a very fragile strata of society. We are all responsible to make a strong stand to protect the rights of children who have no power to protect themselves. As President Xi Jinping is leading a world reform in concepts, values, and narratives, hope he and President Putin and all sensible leaders of the world will pay attention and help in protecting the rights of children all over the world from this pure evil that threatens their lives and their future. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope we join forces together to face this evil and to protect our elderly people and our children from Western hegemony.
感谢布塞纳夏班女士的精彩发言。下面有请厄立特里亚外交部总司长易卜拉欣·马哈茂德先生发言。每位嘉宾发言的时间是8分钟。Thank you, Ms. Shaban. Now let's welcome Mr. Ibrahim Mahmoud, Director General, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Eritrea. And the time for each speech is 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, allow me to congratulate the People's Republic of China for hosting this timely and important forum on global human rights governance. Global human rights governance, after 75 years of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and 30 years of Vienna Declaration and Program of Action, it's imperative to assess the global human rights governance and its mechanism. Eritrea, after 30 years of war of liberation, in 1991 achieved its independence. After the independence, Eritrea chose its way of nation building and economic development. But this free choice was not accepted by the powers of hegemony and domination, by describing Eritrea as a bad example for good. As a consequence, in pretext of human rights, Eritrea faced a lot of challenges in its endeavor on nation building and development. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while good governance is a manner essentially free of abuse and corruption with due regards for rule of law, the way UN human rights mechanism and global human rights governance has run its campaign against Eritrea on the alleged basis of human rights abuse has been nothing but free of abuse, corruption, and blatant disregard for the rule of law. Global human rights governance should all time try to empower vulnerable states in asymmetric power relation irrespective of territorial boundaries, geographic location, or political ideology. However, human rights mechanism and global human rights governance are yet to bridge that gap. Instead, these mechanisms and governance have become a tool by which the powers that be punish non-compliant country. Human rights is mainstreamed in Eritrea's nation building and promotes equal rights and opportunities sanctioned by law. The Transnational Code, complemented by 178 proclamations and 125 legal notices, was published in 2015. Eritrean women were an integral part of the struggle for liberation and continue to equally participate in post-independence, national service, and national building projects. An overwhelming focus and effort by the government is to consolidate substantial progress and achievements in gender equality, mainstreaming, and empowerment. One of the main targets of hostility by the human rights regimes is the National Service Program that was declared as the National Service Proclamation ratified as a law in 1991 and amended in 1995 by the government of the state of Eritrea. Post-independence, Eritrea saw the government inherit a war-torn economy and a country placed in a geostrategic location. It was imperative for the government to mobilize its population to build the nation economically, socially, politically, and militarily. Thus, the implementation of National Service Proclamation presents a unique opportunity to achieve an independent and self-reliant Eritrea. As it is objectively stated in the National Proclamation, implemented clearly by the government and its citizens, that Eritrea is to this very day self-reliant and above all has helped it withstand numerous aggression, unjust multilateral and unilateral sanctions from international organizations and individual powers, as well as successfully thwarted external interference in the internal affairs. The government of Eritrea had, at the outset of independence, put extensive efforts to unify a diverse population. National service have and still is, to this day, the centerpiece by which Eritrean citizens have come to share enough common values and preference to help build a nation that can defend its dignity and liberty. The 1998 war of aggression by Ethiopia and subsequent sanctions by Western countries under the umbrella of the United Nations Security Council prolonged Eritrea's national service by placing the nation in no war, no peace situation. The 2018 rapprochement between Eritrea and Ethiopia might have provided a recipe and a brief period of peace in the region, but subsequent disruption of that encouraging progress made by both countries was halted when TPLF attacked the northern command of Ethiopia army in November 3, 2000, and further escalated the war by launching rockets into capital city of Eritrea, Asmara, on 14 November 2020. However, it was members of the national service that served as the backbone of Eritrea's defense force who gallantly defend Eritrea's sovereignty and territorial integrity through the last 2 decades while sustaining its economy by participating in national development plans that span through different sectors of the country. It's troubling to continually see Eritrea being accused of violating the rights of its own citizens just because it exercises its own version of national service. So many other countries have the privilege of doing so as well. However, the unwarranted approach and presumptuous qualification on Eritrea perpetuated in the pretext of human rights crisis through the special rapporteur on Eritrea running through yearly renewals fails to mention Eritrea's pragmatic development approach and the vibrant political process of nation building reflected in strong national unity and citizenship, equal rights and opportunity, responsible participation of the people, effective local governance system, and above all, peace and stability. Instead, the mechanism used by the Special Rapporteur and the numerous human rights regimes choose by design to produce reports rigid with concern, observation, unidentified sources, remote monitoring, and etc. to deliver reports contrary to the developments on the ground. At the same time, the absence of responsibility and methodology further exposes the lack of proper implementation code of conduct that is a time-honored tradition in good governance worldwide. There is no denying Eritrea, like every other country in the world, faces challenges. However, the government of Eritrea continually works to address these challenges and improves human rights standards in the country. Accordingly, there is no crisis that warrants the targeting of the nation through Human Rights Council agendas and mandates. Eritrea's progress in all sectors, including the mainstreaming of human rights, embodied peace, stability, equal rights, and opportunity, emerging legal trends, and governance system that capitalize on popular participation. As such, Eritrea has earnestly worked to promote dignified engagement and cooperation predicated on mutual respect, understanding, and benefit, in line with its efforts of consolidating of human rights, mainstreaming that also gradually fulfills its regional and international commitments. The reality is that the Confrontational Human Rights Council mandates and mechanisms have not created any dividend in the promotion of human rights. In fact, they have attempted to undermine its engagement and international cooperation. This conduct is in breach of accepted principles and norms of objectivity, neutrality, and professionalism, which must be characterized the ethical standards of those entrusted with the task. As such, the constant Special Rapporteur report is a tired and foiled attempt to portray a bleak picture of the nation on the basis of the same flawed pattern and methodology. So far, Eritrea has promoted dignified engagement predicated on partnership. The preparation of third universal periodic review national reports is underway. As a member of Human Rights Council, will continue to advocate against politicization of human rights in the Council and the targeting of sovereign countries for ulterior political motives in the pretext of human rights. Therefore, we must awake the potential objectification of the global governance as a mask for ideological agendas. In the sense, a further bending empirical tasks involves inquiring into the global human rights architect and the key political questions. How are these regulatory governance arrangements connected to power structure? Whose interests are being protected? And whose values and cultures are promoted? The lack of coherent human rights governance on global scale needs rethinking. Eritrea's case is an accurate example of how states and certain governmental actors within the existing international human rights governance retain significant control over core governance functions, the most visible of which are resource allocation and implementation of self-serving agenda. At the end, it's time that the world to say no to the hegemonic and unilateral action of the US and its allies and promote multilateral mechanism of UN and Human Rights Council. Eritrea will continue to work with China and other like-minded countries for equality, cooperation, and development. And thank you.
感谢易卜拉欣·马哈茂德先生的精彩发言。下面有请塞尔维亚国家管理和地方自治部国务秘书焦尔杰·达比奇先生发言。Thank you, Mr. Mahmoud. Now let's welcome Mr. Georgia Dabic, State Secretary and Ministry of State Administration and Local Self-Government, Serbia. And time for each speech is 8 minutes.
Thank you, Moderator. Dear delegates, deputies, dear friends from People's Republic of China, thank you for inviting us from Serbia to participate in this important forum. It is a pleasure to be in Beijing, in China, in a state where 52 different nations live in peace and tranquility together. And this is an example how coexistence should look like, and we want to share your experiences in this regard. We are particularly pleased with the fact that we are here at a time when China is celebrating a great jubilee. 100 years since the founding of the Communist Party of China, which began the process of relief the Chinese people from poverty. Today's development policy, personified by President Xi Jinping, has positioned People's Republic of China at the head of the countries that will create the future of the world in the coming decades, which make us very happy in Serbia. The strategic partnership between the Republic of Serbia and the People's Republic of China was established in 2009, and relations were further deepened in 2013, and then raised to the level of a strategic partnership in 2016. Relations between two countries today is on the highest level in history, and we are very proud of it. It's a privilege for us to be a key and strategic partner of China in Europe today. The President of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, officially met with the President of China, Xi Jinping, 7 times. Thanks to the excellent personal relations of the two statesmen, the interstate relations of the Republic of Serbia and People's Republic of China are said to be bound by steel friendship. The Chinese president visited Serbia in 2016, and it was the first visit of a Chinese president to our country after 32 years. On that occasion, 22 agreements on cooperation between the two countries in various fields were signed. Serbia also attaches great importance to the cooperation mechanisms, such as China Plus 16 and One Belt, One Road. Over the past 10 years, Serbia has proven to be the most stable partner of China in Europe. We strongly support the One China's policy and oppose any foreign interference in your internal relations. Republic of China is example I told us before how coexistence should look like, because a lot of different nations live here together in peace and tranquility, and in Serbia the state of human rights is of the highest possible level. We are very proud of that. In Belgrade it will never happen that anyone is attacked because of their nationality, religion or skin color. When it comes to Serbia itself, the most difficult situation and problem in terms of human rights and freedoms take place in Kosovo, in Metohija. Serbian province that was violently separated with the support of the West after horrific bombing by NATO in 1999, which was in direct contradiction to a charter of the United Nations and by the decision of the Security Council. Daily attacks on Serbs by Albanians have been going on for decades, and in recent days the campaign of violence reached its peak. Just a few weeks ago, the police of fake state Kosovo again wounded several Serbs with a firearm. This is already 6 shooting from firearm and the 38th attack since the beginning of the year by Albanians on Serbs. No one from European Union said nothing, and no one from international community said nothing, because Albanians are their allies, and Serbia is not, because Serbia cooperates with China, with Russia and with free world. Despite everything, the Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija are ready to defend with their lives their right to their territory, to their land, which has been under occupation for 23 years. We are grateful to brotherly China for defending international law together with us and not recognizing the fake state Kosovo. We are grateful to our friends from Republic of China because together with us they are building factories in Serbia, investing in road infrastructure, investing in the economy and helping us internationally to preserve our territorial integrity. And finally, thank you for being the first country that helped us when it was the most difficult at the beginning of the corona pandemic. And when, thanks to your president, Xi Jinping, Republic of China sent to us all kinds of medical equipment that was necessary for saving lives in Serbia. And at the end, in Serbia we have an old proverb, you know a friend in a trouble. So I'm here to tell you, long live Serbian-Chinese friendship.
感谢焦尔奇 感谢焦尔杰·达比奇先生的精彩发言。下面有请安哥拉司法人权部人权与公民事务国务秘书安娜·雅努阿里奥女士发言。Thank you for the wonderful speech, Mr. Dabic. Now let's welcome Ms. Ana Celeste Cardoso Hunu-Alio, State Secretary of Human Rights and Citizenship, Ministry of Justice and Human Rights, Angola. Let's welcome.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, allow me to thank the China Authority for the invitation and organize this forum on GDPA. In the name of the Angolan government and the Angolan citizens, thanks for the organization of the forum and put us together to intervene on international cooperation and global human rights governance. Angola is a country in Africa. Regarding the human rights issues, we work and documents that means national human rights strategy. We have a national human rights institution at executive level, at judicial level, and at legislative level. At executive level, the human rights issues are led by our minister, the Minister of Justice and Human Rights, and we have structure at central level and at local level to educate our citizens on human rights and build and put human rights as a culture. The strategy, the National Human Rights Strategy, have also a National Human Rights Action Plan. It's a guide document which aims to frame the action of the government, the field of human rights, with the reference of our governance plan. This strategy is based on the Constitution of the Republic of Angola and an international treaty ratified by Angola on human rights, namely the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and the African Charter on Human and People Rights, and the Angola commitments for election as a member of Human Rights Council. The national strategy was designed in the context of international system of human rights, conflicts, climate change, COVID impact, and others. Become a compass for the effective implementation of government's agenda on human rights. Should be absorbed and reflect in all sectors, public policy, as well in the most decisive national policy instrument. Our main objective is to achieve the national majority in human rights, elevating human rights to the category of issue of national security, work on evaluation, prevention, and measures to guarantee stability and social peace, as well to assess, prevent, and take measures for the issue of defense, security, and international order. In this measure, return to Angolan the civic and political sovereignty of their defense and protection through permanent self-assessment, denunciation, condemn, correction of human rights violation committed by ourselves. The other main objective is to dismiss the external paternalism for the outside. Is guide, evaluate, denounce, and condemn by some private law organization considered independent that deal with human rights. To make Angola as a reference, respect and defend human rights based on principle of human dignity, ensuring respect for and compliance with human rights in Angola. In Angola, as an African country, we have so many challenges. The general ignorance of human rights, liaison between the administration and justice system, lack of effective implementation of human rights. But in this strategy and action plan, we define so many activities, tools, and action to change this challenge. Promote human rights education involving public and private education institutions, strengthen the dialogue with civil society for active and participatory citizenship in the partnership relation with the state, improve the relationship between the entities responsible for administration of justice of law enforcement with the citizenship, increase investment leading to access to health, education, access to land, housing, particularly in rural areas. and all the administrative mechanisms which restriction or impede the exercise of rights, freedom rights, improve access to justice and information, promote gender equality, empower women, domestic violence, and other. Regard the cooperation. We define the strategy, define this cooperation as a different level, like 3 or 4 levels. The first level is the cooperation with UN system, UN agency, active engagement with human rights committee and treaty bodies. At regional level, the IU system level, active engagement with the African Commission for Human and People Rights, and bilateral human rights agreements and bilateral dialogue. We think in this area we can cooperate with all countries of Africa, of the world, and also, why not, with China. And also cooperation with national and international civil society organizations. In conclusion, the National Strategy of Angola is a document that allows the participation in a narrative and organized manner in the most important international events, drawing up in advance a memorandum which draws the objective to be attained at each event. Follow and implement the recommendation of Human Rights Council in the framework of Universal Periodic Review. Submit the report in due time and defend them before the competent institution. All meeting with the National Assembly promote ratification and ratify international human rights treaty, promote the alignment of public policy with international human rights standards. The strategy and Angola's Human Rights Action Plan is accordant of the international principle of cooperation, global human rights governance, and the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action. Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks. Obrigado.
感谢安娜·雅努阿里奥女士的精彩发言。下面有请肯尼亚内罗毕和平进程协调人特使、肯前常务副外长、前常驻联合国代表马查里亚·卡马乌先生发言。Thank you, Ms. Ana Celeste Cardoso Juanlino. Now let's welcome Mr. Macharia Kamau, Special Envoy, Office of the Former President, Kenya. Let's welcome.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking the organizers of this event for the invitation to attend and to participate in this important conference. Yesterday and earlier today, I personally learned a lot and enjoyed the sharing of ideas on human rights, development, and the collective challenges that we all face to attain both. I personally have always recognized the success of the development approach that China has taken and the way in which it has embedded the noble idea of poverty eradication and human rights in its political and developmental framework. The historic achievements that China has enjoyed and that have been lauded here several times at this forum are achievements that have very deep lessons for all of us and that we must all aspire to replicate in order to enjoy the success and the promise of human rights and poverty eradication in all our countries, both rich and poor. As for the billions of us in developing countries, the great rejuvenation of China of the past 4 decades is an unprecedented, historic, and towering beacon of hope for the suffering masses yearning for prosperity, dignity, and social and economic transformation. As some of you may know, I worked on the Sustainable Development Goals while I was the permanent representative of Kenya to the United Nations as the co-chair of the Open Working Group on the Sustainable Development Goals. It was a momentous task, and the support that we got from countries like China was tremendous and singularly imperative for the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. As you all know, there are 17 goals, It is not by coincidence that the Sustainable Development Goals are numbered in the way in which they are numbered. Poverty eradication was seen by all as the key, most urgent goal of all. And even though we had a lot of debate as to which were the more important of the SDGs, and even though we all agreed that all of them were equally important, we all came to realize that the Sustainable Development Goals that target basic survival, human dignity, and development had to be the first, with poverty eradication being the very first of the SDGs. Now, since I left New York and the United Nations, and particularly since taking up my current assignment as the Special Envoy of the facilitator of the Eastern African-led Nairobi Peace Process for the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, I have come to realize in a very fundamental and structural way that peace is the fundamental human condition that predicates and guarantees opportunities and possibilities of all other human rights, as well as sustainable development goals. Once peace is attained and guaranteed, all else is possible. Without peace and the cessation of wars, nothing positive is possible. I do agree with all the previous speakers before yesterday and today that human rights are the cornerstone of just, equitable, and sustainable society, providing individuals with the freedom, dignity, and equality they deserve. However, navigating the intricacies of human rights in today's complex global landscape is not an easy task. This is particularly so for developing countries that remain highly vulnerable to the political manipulation of internal political elites who may not have their sights set on the promotion of development through the eradication of poverty or the provision of basic services, or through external forces who have as their singular objective the use of developing countries for their own geopolitical and national goals. Kenya, the country from which I come, as a member of the United Nations, has ratified key international human rights treaties, demonstrating its commitment to upholding human rights standards. The country's constitution and laws also enshrine provisions safeguarding human rights and fundamental freedoms. However, like many nations, Kenya still faces significant human rights challenges, the most pressing of which being the eradication of extensive and persistent poverty and the provision of basic human services to its citizens. Despite efforts by the government to address these issues, progress has been slow and uneven. This highlights the complexities involved in ensuring the full realization of human rights within a country, even with existing legal frameworks and commitments. In Africa, the African Union plays a vital normative role in promoting and protecting human rights. The African Charter on Human and People's Rights serves as the African Union's primary human rights instrument, outlining the rights and freedoms of all individuals and what they are entitled to. Additionally, the African Union has established mechanisms like the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and the African Court on Human and People's Rights to monitor and enforce human rights standards on the continent. But while Kenya and the African Union acknowledge the significance of human rights, challenges persist. As has been stated here severally by people who spoke before me, it is essential to recognize that human rights cannot be solved in isolation to other key developmental goals and to the isolation of the fundamental precondition of peace and harmony among our societies. Ladies and gentlemen, building upon what I have said, it is crucial to acknowledge another dimension of the challenge in handling human rights in a complex world: the differing perspectives of human rights and approaches between Western countries and the rest of us, and this has been spoken to by all the speakers before me. Western human rights approaches are grounded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the VDA, like the rest of us as well, but tend to overemphasize individual civil and political rights such as freedom of expression, assembly, and religion, and identity rights. For most Western countries, these rights are seen, and rightly so I might add, as inherent to all individuals and serve as the foundation of many international human rights treaties, to the exclusion, prioritization, or isolation of other economic and political rights. This is damaging to the international relations, especially when embedded in the foreign policies and actions of Western countries. It is when we see the embedding of these priorities in their foreign policies that it becomes a problem for us as developing countries. On the other hand, most African countries take a different approach to human rights, which emphasize collective well-being, social economic development, and the right to development, and the drive for the provision of basic services. Kenya argues, for example, that economic, social, and cultural rights are fundamental to human rights and should be prioritized alongside civil and political rights. Like China, Kenyan authorities maintain that cultural relativism and national peculiarities should be considered when interpreting and implementing human rights standards, even while maintaining thresholds for compliance. This differing perspective between Western and African human rights approaches can create challenges and tensions on the global and national stage. It leads to wasteful and sometimes damaging debates over the universality versus cultural relativism of human rights and questions regarding the appropriate balance between individual freedoms and societal development. In the context of Kenya and the many African countries, some of which are represented here, this challenge manifests itself in various ways. For instance, Western countries may prioritize pushing for legislative and institutional reform on civil and political rights, identity politics, and focusing on issues such as police brutality and freedom of expression. On the other hand, China's influence and investment in Africa, including in our country, for which we are truly grateful, mostly and rightly emphasizes development projects, infrastructure, provision of basic services such as water, food, and the general socio-economic advancement of the people. Now, this tension between West and East presents a delicate balance for Kenya and other African nations to navigate. On the one hand, they are under policy conditionalities that push human rights priorities within their societies, ensuring the protection of civil and political rights and combating discrimination. On the other hand, they are under pressure from their citizenry to work with foreign partners that emphasize economic development and prioritize a different understanding of human rights that is rooted in the provision of basic services and prosperity, even as they protect individual rights. In light of these complexities, finding common ground and fostering dialogue between different rights approaches becomes very crucial for vulnerable countries like in which we live. It is essential for most African countries to engage in constructive conversations that seek to bridge gaps and identify areas of convergence. These include recognizing the interconnectedness of civil and political rights, as well as economic, social, and cultural rights, and working towards comprehensive solutions that address the multidimensional nature of human rights challenges. In conclusion, The challenge of handling human rights in a complex world for many of us on our continent in Africa is riddled with domestic and foreign political consequences. It is a very real challenge that sometimes has very real political outcomes that are damaging and punitive. We had examples given here today. But promoting dialogue, understanding, and shared values, and by doing this in a constructive way, we can work towards a more inclusive and comprehensive approach to human rights that respects the diversity of perspectives and promotes the well-being and dignity of all individuals in all of our countries. Thank you.
感谢卡马乌先生的精彩发言。下面有请塞拉利昂人权委员会主席帕特里西亚·纳尔苏·恩达内马女士发言。Thank you for the wonderful speech, Mr. Kamau. Now let's welcome Ms. Patricia Nasu Danema, Chairperson, Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone. Let's welcome.
Representatives of the government of China, the diplomatic missions, national human rights institutions, organizers of the forum, civil society organizations, members of the Fourth Estate, all delegates, good morning. Greetings from the Human Rights Commission of Sierra Leone that was recently reaccredited as a Grade A national human rights institution by the Global Alliance for National Human Rights Institution, being the independent body charged with the responsibility to assess the operations of national human rights institutions in line with the provisions highlighted in the United Nations Paris Principles of 1993. I am particularly happy to be part of this team commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action. The presence of all, especially of NHRIs, clearly manifests our continued commitment to the realization of our broad mandates of protecting and promoting human rights. As a representative of an NHRI, I see it worthy to publicly commend all the NHRI representatives for the roles they play in the promotion and protection of human rights in their various countries, despite all the challenges we face. Let me use this opportunity to appreciate the government of China for the role played in the human rights landscape through various forms of intervention across the world, including interventions to the Human Rights Commission through the Embassy of China in country. We commemorate 30th anniversary of the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action. 30 years on is a moment of reflection for all of us, looking at it from the point of view that the enjoyment of human rights is the collective responsibility of all. The duty bearers and right holders too, and all others in various categories, let us reflect and ask ourselves certain questions in relation to the Vienna Declaration for the past 30 years. What have we done as key duty bearers in meeting our human rights obligations of respecting, protecting, and fulfilling human rights? Civil society organizations should also reflect on how effective they have been in advocating for the enjoyment of rights, being one of their core activities. National human rights institutions should also note that the Paris Principles, being the document that highlights how national human rights institutions should operate, should also note that it will be 30 this year. Quoting a paragraph from the preamble of the VDPA, it reads, recognizing and reaffirming that all human rights derive from the dignity and worth inherent in the human person, and that the human person is the central subject of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and consequently should be the principal beneficiary and should participate actively in the realization of these rights and freedoms. To all present, but especially NHRIs, Let this be a moment for further reflection for all of us by asking ourselves the question, to what extent do we as NHRIs engage government on human rights, state obligations of respecting, protecting, and fulfilling human rights, being one of our core functions in addressing the above quotation? How well are we doing? Do we need to go back to the drawing board? These are some of the questions that national human rights institutions should be asking themselves for the 30 years of existence. Let me state a few interventions by the Commission in terms of legislative reviews, being one of the functions of national human rights institutions. Following the high spate of rape and sexual penetration of underage girls, the Commission and its partners in 2019 reviewed the Sexual Offences Act of 2012 to give it more stringent measures for perpetrators of this deadly act. The reviewed 2019 Act speaks volumes as it now addresses cases of sexual violence against women and girls. To give effect to this act, government, through the Office of the First Lady, established a sexual offences model court in July 2020 to deal with perpetrators of rape and sexual penetration. This court has been effective in its services in terms of investigations and sentencing of offenders. Zooming on women's rights, specifically on participation in politics, government has provided for, in its new Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act, 30% seats exclusively reserved for female candidates, being a response to SDG Goal 5. To give effect to this provision, the Public Elections Act of January 2023 provides that for every 3 candidates on the list presented by political parties under the proportional representation system that the country will be using during the forthcoming presidential and parliamentary elections on the 24th of June 2023, one should be a woman. 30% seats have also been reserved for appointive positions across the board for all women. This is meant to promote inclusion of women in the whole electoral process. In response to SDG 10, SDG Goal 4 on access to quality education was made the government's flagship program to create universal access to all children to basic education free of charge. This has reflected tremendously by the increasing number of children now going to school in Sierra Leone. At the UPR in November 2021, Sierra Leone accepted recommendations towards the protection of human rights defenders, considering the tremendous contributions they also make in the human rights landscape. A model law is on the way to specifically protect them. The 1991 Constitution of Sierra Leone already protects all persons in the enjoyment of freedom of speech, movement, association, and assembly, and privacy. Some of these rights are what have been provided for in the model law for human rights defenders. Additionally, Part 5 of the Public Order Act of 1965, which hitherto criminalized free speech by journalists, has been repealed. After years of advocacy by the Commission and its partners, government abolished the death penalty, being one of the recommendations of the Universal Periodic Review after 2 reviews. Over the last 5 years, Sierra Leone has consistently passed the control of corruption test on the MCC scorecard from 49% in 2017 to a minimum score of 70% over the last 5 years, noting the role that high levels of corruption plays in eroding the enjoyment of rights. Despite some progress made, we still have challenges. As I speak now, the country is actually marred with several hate speech messages following the forthcoming elections. I however ask that we all, in the promotion and protection of human rights landscape, continue to be courageous and keep pushing to ensure that we all live a life of dignity. Thank you very much.
感谢恩达内马女士的精彩发言。下面有请国家哲学社会科学1级教授、中央党校原校委委员韩庆祥先生。Thank you so much, Ms. Patricia Nasudanema. Let's welcome Mr. Han Qingxiang, first grade professor of National Social Sciences, former member of the Party School of the Central Committee of the CPC. Let's welcome.
各位嘉宾、女士们、 Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. A philosophical foundation of human rights in China. Ever since the contemporary times started, human rights philosophy was actually based on the capitalism from the West and full of feudalism and privilege of Western countries. So, Universal Declaration of Human Rights played a very important role in promoting human rights. But still, over the past decades, the Western countries still utilizes their manipulation to impose their understanding and definition of human rights on other countries. And they, in the disguise of democracy and freedom, try to repress other countries and other peoples. One of the fundamental reasons is related to the philosophical diagram in the Western countries. So human rights, in its essence, is the difference among the different diagrams. And
客虽主变，诸统之客，认为西方世界掌握着人权标准的制定权和人权裁定的话语权，非西方世界应服从西方世界的主导，若不服从就对其进行制裁。
Actually, we have seen that
已经暴露出种种的历史局限。
Western philosophical paradigm focused on the dichotomy of subject and object, regards the Western world as the master and the non-Western world as a guest, regard the guest as the ruling the guest. Actually, the Western concept of human rights has exposed various historical limitations, and socialism with Chinese characteristics has entered a new era, and Chinese nation has ushered in a great leap from standing up, getting strong, and becoming modern. And scientific socialism is full of vitality in China in the 21st century, holding high the great banner of socialism with Chinese characteristics in the world. The continuous development of socialism with Chinese characteristics wrote the theory, system, and culture has opened up new ways for developing countries to move forward. Speaking of equal human rights in which everyone is the master and equal, this is from the philosophical foundation, because in the Western view of human rights is fundamentally a monistic view of human rights at first. It emphasizes that the Western world is at the commanding height of the whole world's historical development and progress, and it stresses human rights from the Western perspective. And but this is the fundamental limitation of the Western human rights, because everyone cannot enjoy equal human rights in their view, and some people trample on other people's human rights with their own so-called human rights. So the history of Western capital expansion and colonial plunder shows that the West often protects its so-called human rights at the expense of other people's human rights. But in China, our view of human rights in the new era emphasizes that everyone is equal, and everyone should have equal human rights, which can be described as equal human rights view, in which everyone is in charge of equality. This is the philosophical foundation of China's view of human rights in the new era. The view of human rights emphasizes that everyone is the subject of human rights. Everyone is an equal subject enjoying human rights. Some people cannot sacrifice and trample on other people's rights in exchange for their own rights and interests, but they should also promote and safeguard others' human rights. In the new era, CPC of China has gradually improved and guaranteed people's livelihood, And it is also the case in making all the people share the fruits of development and realize the common prosperity for all. President Xi Jinping emphasizes that people can feel fairness and justice in every judicial cases, especially. This is real equal human rights view. In China, we stick to people-oriented human rights, and we always put people at the heart of our work. This is from the perspective of value orientation. And the Western view of human rights focuses on capital and capitalist characteristics. And also, as President Xi Jinping emphasized, we need to make sure that every and each one of our citizens have access to education, health services, food, and basic needs, and have a happy and secure life, and making sure every of their rights are guaranteed. And also, we have this universal human rights view in making sure people get all the benefits. China's view of human rights in the new era is a universal view of human rights that benefits everyone. This concept of human rights emphasizes that continuous improving people's well-being, making more and more fair development achievements, and making sure the development benefits can be accessible to all, striving to make people happy and realizing common prosperity for all. These are the goal of China's view of human rights in the new era. And President Xi pointed out, we put people in the highest position in our minds. People's yearning for a better life is our goal. This is not only the aspiration of a CPC China, but also a real action that China has been taking in the past years. Ever since the 18th National Congress of CPC, our party has anchored the goal of building a wall of society in an all-round way and building a socialist modern power in an all-round way. It is not only an overall victory in tackling poverty, but also opened a new journey of building a socialist modern country. And this universal human rights view has a supremacy and a lofty morality. It is a much better view than that of other countries. Another aspect I would like to touch upon is the symbiosis human rights view, which emphasizes harmony and symbiosis. In the West, their view of human rights is a one-dimensional development view of human rights. This view of human rights pays attention to the supremacy of capital, profit, money, and material, and advocates material omnipotence. But this is quite the opposite, because in China, we believe we need to put our emphasis on harmony and coexistence. We pay attention to peace and development, and we promote harmony among different stakeholders. So this is the general or the guiding principle of China's view on human rights. And Chinese CPC and the government has been making sure that no one is left behind in our efforts to eradicate poverty. And common prosperity means that no one is left behind. And over the years, the CPC has been working hard, forge ahead and bravely, and make unremitting efforts to achieve these goals. So China's view of human rights in the new era is a systematic view of human rights that pays attention to the unity of human beings, the collective and individual human rights being integrated. It is a concept of developing human rights to promote the cause of human rights according to the improvement of living conditions. The above-mentioned concepts of equal human rights, people-oriented human rights, inclusive human rights, integrated human rights are important foundation and which have laid a sound foundation for our past and will help us in the future. Thank you.
感谢韩庆阳先生的精彩发言。下面有请刚果金外交部政策司司长阿波利奈尔·朗巴姆邦吉先生。Thank you, Mr. Han. Now we'd like to invite Mr. Apolinar Lamba Mubangi, Director General of Department of Research and Policy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the time for each speech is 8 minutes. Thank you.
Monsieur le représentant du gouvernement chinois, Excellences,
dear
Messieurs les ambassadeurs,
leaders, dear guests,
Mesdames et Messieurs,
dear ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, dear experts and colleagues,
c'est un grand honneur pour moi
I'm very honored
de contribuer
to
à travers ces mots
share with you
pour joindre
about the
ma
topic of human rights.
à celle de hauts fonctionnaires.
After listening to so many wonderful presentations, I also would like to contribute a little bit. Previously, diplomats and UN officials also shared their views. To start with, I would like to take this opportunity to express our congratulations to the organizers, the Publicity Department of the Central Committee, the MFA of China, Xinhua News Agency, SIDCA,
l'agence de presse Xi'an et la Société chinoise d'études des droits de l'homme.
Also China's human rights societies.
J'apprécie le choix judicieux.
I appreciate very much the theme picked by the forum and also the themes of our parallel sessions. Around these topics and themes, we profoundly discuss about different areas of human rights protection and promotion. So I would like to say that this forum is held against the backdrop of a very complex and challenging international situation because humanity must identify a proper way and stand in solidarity to cope with the very complex challenges the world is facing. Because humanity is facing multiple challenges and threats. Among all the topics, in general, for all the countries, we need to constantly redouble our efforts and also to foster a synergy among us. Just as the 75th UNGA stressed about the importance of multilateralism and multilateral cooperation, only by doing this can we effect changes, because there are so many challenges in the world. For example, armed conflicts, international terrorism, and the ubiquitous conflicts and the failure to honor the international commitments by some countries, and the tense situation and military competition by some countries. In such a big context, plus the climate change and post-COVID challenges, humanity's vulnerability has been exacerbated, and the vulnerability of global and regional cooperation are exposed fully. When we talk about the security and human rights, when we talk about SDGs, there are some important documents of Africa which are quite ambitious, with clear goals. And these strategies and documents are now challenged by many risks. For example, the AU 2063 is also such a document, but our development is being challenged. But for me, only can we address the security issue, can we address the human rights issue on the African continent. Just as President Xi mentioned in his congratulatory letter, that about the importance of human rights protection and promotion, and the DRC president also pays high attention to the central role of people, and people should be placed above all other matters in a nation, in the UN Charter, and in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There are provisions of guaranteeing human rights through security, respectful sovereignty of states, respectful territorial integrity of all countries. There should be no interference in other countries' internal affairs, and also
dans les relations mutuelles, principe consacré dans l'article 2, alinéa 4
avoid armed
de la Charte des Nations Unies
means to address the conflicts between any other two sides.
de l'acte constitutif
Additionally,
la récente visite du chef de l'État congolais auprès de
most
son
recently,
homologue chinois
the DRC president paid a state visit to China. It happened last month in May, and this important state visit demonstrated the long-term, profound friendship between DRC and China.
Barbare aux conséquences humanitaires désastreuses.
On the side of the DRC, we are witnessing a situation where human rights are being tramped on. For example, the eastern countries and regions like the terrorism organizations in Rwanda are recklessly trampling on the human rights of DRC. And such kind of terrorism violations are running counter to the international order in accordance with the international norms. Hopefully, through our efforts, through peaceful solution, we can address the violent behaviors and violations from Rwanda. All the terrorist attacks from the east are partially supported by local armed groups. I noticed there are representatives from Kenya and Angola, and your state leaders have contributed a lot in the coordination of such conflicts. As you may know, this kind of massive and severe violations of human rights are themselves crimes, like war crimes. They are crimes against the humanity, bringing devastating impact on ordinary people. DRC believes that these perpetrators of violations should be punished. Dear leaders, in my presentation, I hope that your attention can be brought to the point that we need to make concerted efforts to reduce the wars and conflicts, especially in Africa. And this is an international security issue, very serious issue. There are so many armed conflicts and terrorism acts. We need to have this joint action and awareness. We need to think about and reflect on how can we truly realize development, how can we truly achieve humanity's progress, where people can gain the benefits. Without peace, there will be nothing. So I want to thank once again for China's leadership in hosting and organizing this forum. Thank you for your considerate arrangement and reception. And long live the friendship between China and DRC. Thank you.
感谢阿波利奈尔·朗巴姆邦吉先感谢阿波利奈尔·朗巴姆邦吉先生的精彩发言。Thank you so much, Mr. Apolinar Lamba Mubangi. 今天上午的大会发言就到这里。感谢来自海内外的各位来宾不远万里来到我们的论坛，也期待下次论坛再次与大家相聚。非常感谢。Thank you so much. The forum is done for today, and thank you for being here. We hope we could meet again in the next forum in the future. Thank you so much. Thank you.